Circa 1992, Hitchens faxed his copy through as regards Columbus Day. If you'll permit me the conceit of a posthumous critique, I'll paraphrase.
You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. On this episode, we are discussing Comply Resist, Track 2 on 2017's Victory Lap LP on Epitaph Records.
Yes, and I'm very excited that we're doing this, Steve. To be perfectly honest with you, this is one of those episodes in Propaganda's catalog that throughout the life of the podcast, I have procrastinated tremendously. I've said it many times, but there's just some songs that kind of are very daunting for me, and it kind of has to be like a right time and right place for me to launch into some of these. So this is very much one of those that I kind of put up there with like Mate Ka Marisa Kun Rasakan, Oka Everywhere, songs like that kind of, freak me out a little bit because they're just so good. And I was thinking about this the other day, and I kind of feel like this one's almost like a companion song to Pigs Will Pay, Bringer of Greater Things, stuff like that. So I kind of see this as sort of in that lineage of episodes that we've done on the podcast in the last couple of years. But I don't know if you've heard it, but Chris has a Patreon episode on Comply Resist, which he released on August 22nd of 2020, which is absurd to think about that being so long ago at this point. But Chris's episode is fabulous. Everybody should go find it on Patreon if they haven't. It's a stellar journey through the writing, demoing, recording, and lyrical breakdown of Comply Resist. And it also includes a great story from Chris regarding his visit to a maximum security prison in New Jersey in the 1990s. So I really enjoyed Chris's episode that he did for Comply Resist, and I strongly encourage people to go back and re-listen to that one as well.
I actually haven't heard that podcast, but now that I've kind of heard you talk about it a bit more here, I actually want to really go back and do it because I really love this song, and I would love to hear from Chris's perspective him break down the song, because this song is an absolute ripper of a song.
Yeah, just before we get into the covers and the interviews and the guests and everything, I'm just wondering if you remember, kind of take me back to 2017 when this record came out. What was your impression upon this type of song first and foremost? Because to me, this song really stands out for the that part in the song. That's the thing that most stands out to me about my initial listenings to this song when it first came out, is that super fast palm muting part that stands out so distinctly on the guitar.
Oh, that part is awesome, but we'll touch on it when we break down the music a bit coming up, but I think this song really shines in the verse part. And I'll explain why a bit later when we go through the actual music part. But before that, I just wanted to catch up because it's been a while since we both recorded an episode together. So I just want to catch up. Tell me what shows you've been to. What's happening?
Let's see. So I went to Bouncing Souls, Anti-Flag, A Wilhelm Scream, and Venomous Pinks in Buffalo last night. And fun podcast tangent, I got to meet up and hang out with Ben Murray from Heart Sounds, Light This City, Darkness Everywhere, the owner of Creator Destructor Records in the Bay Area, and one of the first guests that ever came on this podcast. He was on episode 6 for Duplicate Keys Acaro. And so I got to meet a real life podcast buddy last night at Town Ballroom here in Buffalo. So that was awesome. But yeah, that's my big one is Bouncing Souls. But I also saw the jazz band Snarky Puppy recently as well. And so that was an absolutely incredible experience of watching a 10-piece jazz band just go absolutely bonkers and blew my mind entirely. So those are my two big ones. What about you? What you been up to?
So I think since the last time we recorded, I went to the Zulu Scowl Jesus Piece Show Me the Body show.
Whoa.
And Zulu was unbelievable at that show.
Yeah.
They're so good. And I don't know, maybe someone can reach out to me on Twitter or something and explain to me this Show Me the Body band, because I just don't get it. Maybe I'm too old. Maybe like, and it's not like I hate banjo. I'm totally fine with banjo. I just don't get this band at all.
Wow, man, I got to tell you, I'm really excited. I think I'm seeing Zulu in New Jersey at a festival in a little over a month from now. So I'm really excited about that. I know I'm seeing Scowl and Gel, and I believe I'm seeing Soul Glow and Zulu as well. So I'm glad to hear that I should be prioritizing that band set during that festival.
Absolutely. And then after that, I ventured into your neck of the woods for Bruce Springsteen.
Yes.
Which people that know me know my deep love for all things Bruce. And it didn't disappoint. It was a magical evening as always.
Yeah, well, I've only seen Bruce Springsteen once, but I saw him in the summer of 2010 in London, England, in Hyde Park, and the Gaslight Anthem opened up that show. So I saw the Gaslight Anthem open up for Bruce Springsteen in London, which was great, and it was on Bruce Springsteen's 60th birthday. So Bruce Springsteen, the entire show, when I saw him, he kept screaming, "I'm fucking 60," and it was absolutely hilarious to see Bruce, just celebrating his 60th birthday in the middle of this massive London park. The man's a party animal. I love him.
Oh, I mean, he's still giving it at the shows. He's 73 now.
Wow.
And, they played 3 hours straight. He took a water break of maybe 15 seconds, and that was it. It was just straight music.
Yeah. He's got to be just like in completely unbelievable physical shape.
Oh, like I've seen him. I think I'm up to 22 or 23 times that I've seen him now, and he is just an absolute like rock and roll machine.
I love it. I love that you've got like this person, because I was thinking about this last night, because during the Bouncing Souls set, which was April 13th, 2023. I realized that the first time I ever saw the Bouncing Souls was April 15th, 1998. So we are 25 years to the week of the first time I saw the Bouncing Souls, and I saw the Bouncing Souls in April of 98 and April of 2023. And it was kind of a mind-blowing experience to think about the ways that artists and music accompany us on our stories and our journeys throughout our lifetimes. Because I was like 15 seeing Bouncing Souls in 98, or 14 maybe, and now I'm 39. So it's like this band has been a part of my life for pretty much as long as I can remember at this point. But that was kind of an amazing realization. So it kind of feels like Bruce is like that for you too, like these like magical moments throughout your entire life story. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Like I've had so many unbelievable moments at Bruce shows, and I've met people at Bruce shows that I, still keep in touch with today from shows that were like 12, 13 years ago. And our only connection is that we stood in line for 8 hours together at a Bruce show and then watched the show together. And it was awesome.
Amazing. Well, and then you get to go see the Habs play the Sabres, I think, within a couple of days of that Bruce show. You were in Buffalo a couple of times. I didn't get to see you either time. I was really bummed about that.
Yeah, it's and that Habs game was awesome too. They won, which I kind of wanted them to lose for the better draft pick, but it was that shootout win with the ride the stick celebration was pretty awesome.
Yeah, and everybody here in Buffalo who's a hockey fan is really celebratory right now, because we've got this hot new goaltender, Devin Levi, who's apparently kicking butt here in town. So I'm happy for the hockey fans of Buffalo for the future. So, that'll be a good time. Maybe we can hit a game next year. I'll try to figure out when your schedule and mine align for a Habs Sabres game next season.
Absolutely.
And if anybody out there listening wants to go see hockey with us, let us know.
Yeah, we could turn this into talking about hockey podcast, but nobody wants that because hockey kind of sucks right now.
I don't know any. I have to say, like, I love watching live hockey, but I do not keep track of what is happening. So I am the last person to ask. But yay, hockey! Go hockey!
Yeah, I need hockey. If I could just speak to you hockey. I need you to just clean up your act and not be so full of awful people.
I think that a lot of people share that sentiment. Whenever some of Chris Hanna's tweets the last couple of years about hockey and hockey culture and Hockey Canada and the NHL are just, really poignant and insightful. So he's kind of, because I know that he follows it so closely. So he's kind of one of my actual sources of information with regards to what is going on and what is good and what is not good in the NHL. But I was, I saw a little bit of the Pride Month jersey controversies going on a couple weeks ago, and I'm just like, it's just disappointing. And I'm rooting for the betterment of society for all people all the time. So that's kind of where I stand on that.
Chris's pro Toronto Maple Leafs tweets they've been getting under my skin.
Have you been roasting him a little bit?
There was a couple of them that I was gonna absolutely roast him, but then I deleted it and I was like, nah, I'm not gonna roast Chris on this one.
Amazing. Well, speaking of Chris, let's have a good chat about Victory Lap and Comply Resist. So yeah, should we go ahead and start chatting about some of these interviews and covers and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. You have 2 good interviews set up for today.
I really do. I'm really excited. And my plan for this episode is to play these interviews back to back with just a little bit of transition between. So as always, the interview timestamps will be in the show notes for anybody out there listening. So you can see where the covers are in the time of the episode. You can see where the interviews stand inside the episode as well, because these episodes get really big. So if you wanted to jump around and do a choose your own adventure style listening for the episode, those timestamps are always there in your show notes. But we have 2 interviews for this episode and 2 covers. Now, before we go into the new interviews, I do want to point out that recently I released a Comply Resist standalone part 1 episode featuring a long, wonderful conversation with my new friend of the podcast, Aukai Ligairi, who made a cover of Comply Resist and has a band that he is forming called the Savage Nobles right now. So if you missed that episode, it's really good, and Aukai's commentary about why Comply Resist matters to him is excellent. But I'm going to feature Aukai's cover on this episode as well, because if you missed that episode, this cover is very good, and I just want to make sure that people can hear it. Steve, you got to listen to that cover a little bit, didn't you?
I did. It's so good.
It's so good. I mean, seriously, some of the covers that come into this show are mind-bogglingly good. And you can just tell how hard Aukai worked on that song and how seriously he took it. And he just made it really his own thing in collaboration with the guy who was helping him with some of the instrumentation on it. He tells the whole story in that episode number 92 interview. So we're going to hear from Aukai, his cover in just a second. So then we're going to hear an interview and an instrumental cover from my new friend, Dr. Anthony Siracusa. And Anthony is the former guitarist of the band Pez, who was on BYO Records, if anybody remembers that band. But he's now an academic with a PhD in history from Vanderbilt University. And he is the author of Nonviolence Before King, The Politics of Being, and the Black Freedom Movement, which was released by the University of North Carolina Press in 2021. So in that interview, we go a bit deep on Anthony's book because it is about compliance and resistance in the fabric of the book. That is what the book is about. So Anthony's academic life as a historian is directly tied to the concepts of compliance and resistance in history. So we discuss his academic and historical research, then we work our way through the song itself and the concepts underlying compliance and resistance. And Anthony's just got great energy on the interview. And I know that everybody is going to love it. So Anthony also contributed a musical cover to this tune. So we are going to check out Anthony's Hoss of a Ripper that he did. It's only guitar and drums. But in order to understand the music that we were talking about in the interview, he got to work and he set up all of his gear and he learned all the parts so that he could talk about it in a bit more depth. So we're going to hear from Anthony and his cover. Then we're going to hear from our second guest, which is another professor, Dr. Jeremy Cohen. He's an assistant professor in Canada, and he studies the anthropology of religion. His academic expertise is in death studies, and he co-founded a website called talkdeath.com, which is an academic hub for death-conscious conversations. So I found Jeremy because my work in religious studies at my other podcast, but we discovered we both love propaganda whenever I saw like the little V on his profile name. And I was like, oh yeah, like what kind of music are you into? And so we just kind of got to chatting on Twitter. But when I began researching this song, I found a blog post and then I discovered that Jeremy wrote it. So as I was researching this episode, I was like, Jeremy's got to come on. You got to come on and talk about your essay that you wrote in the wake of the release for Victory Lap. So we talk about Jeremy's essay. We expand upon what Chris discovered about Christopher Hitchens' original essay. So like me, Jeremy didn't even know that this Hitchens essay existed before the release of Victory Lap. But we both talk about how we were consuming Hitchens' writing as a really important, influential academic thinker for us in like the mid 2000s. We both talk about how important Christopher Hitchens was to both of us and how this like 2017 release of Victory Lap shined a light on something about Hitchens and his way of thinking that we never knew. So I'm really excited by these conversations. I'm delighted by Anthony's conversation because his stuff talks about the history of compliance and resistance in the US. And then Jeremy and I do a deep dive on Christopher Hitchens. And then we've got a couple of great covers from Aukai and from Anthony. So there's some great stuff in this. So are you excited for this, Steve?
This is going to be a good one. I can't wait.
Amazing. Okay, so we're going to go through those. Remember, the timestamps are in the show notes. And Steve and I will be back in just a little bit. So enjoy.
Colorful, exotic friend, respectable, well-spoken, like the rest of them. As you know, I'm colorblind, your credit to your kind, the kind. Silly talk of resurgence, ceremony communion with an unconquered natural world. Where is your gratitude for what we've done for you? This paradise Eden.
Dr. Anthony Siracusa, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Oh, my friend, I'm so delighted to be here. A huge fan of your work, of course, a huge fan of the band, and this has been a long time coming.
I know we've been threatening to do this. This happens once in a while where I will literally text with somebody for 2 years.
Yeah.
And then we finally will get around to it. But when I first started this podcast, you immediately were on me and Keith's spreadsheet. Somehow we connected quickly.
Yeah.
And you were always on the comply resist spreadsheet.
Yeah.
What do you remember about this? Because my memories about this are a little hazy. I think Keith actually found you. I can't remember.
Well, so I think what happened is because of your Classical Ideas podcast, I think my book came across your radar. And it was from an academic perspective. And I think you reached out. I have to go and look at the messages. And when the Propaganda podcast first came out, I was so stoked. And so it was kind of this convergence. The book came out, the podcast started, we began communicating. And you asked me, like, what songs would you want to do? And I sent you 4 or 5, but I demonstrated a strong preference for Comply Resist, which we'll get into here shortly.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned a book. You have a book called Nonviolence Before King, The Politics of Being and the Black Freedom Struggle. So congratulations on the release of that book. Do you want to just tell a little bit about what your work is about so that the listeners out there can understand kind of like what you do on a professional level?
For sure. Yeah. And by the way, I sent this book to Chris Hanna from Propaganda. And then when you all interviewed him, he actually mentioned the book.
Yeah, he did.
When he was talking to y'all. So, because we corresponded a little bit through his Patreon page. But long story short, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and that was the place where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in April of 1968. And being a young guy, of course, we all have to be from somewhere, right? So I grew up in Memphis, and like many people, I was like, oh, I can't wait to leave Memphis. But
bingo. Yeah, me in St. Louis, I wanted to leave. The whole time I was there, I wanted to go.
Right. And then as I got older, though, I started to realize, wow, Memphis is kind of a unique place. And it was a number of factors. And the first one was being 10, 11 years old, like all school children. I got in a big yellow school bus. They took me to the National Civil Rights Museum in downtown Memphis. This is the place where Dr. King was assassinated. It's at the Lorraine Motel. It's been turned into a museum. And I remember going in there and they had a full-sized Ku Klux Klansman's robe inside of a giant glass case. And I'm an 11-year-old kid, right? Seeing this object. And first of all, it's just scary because it's on a mannequin. It's got a mask. It just looks scary. But I also knew there's something powerful about this object. I don't know what it is or why it's so powerful. But then I walked around the corner and they had the full-size Greyhound bus that freedom riders used to test segregation laws across the U.S. South. This was blown up by the Klan in Anniston, Alabama during the freedom rides in 1961. So again, I'm like 11 years old. I'm seeing these objects of immense violence, and I don't understand them. Well, fast forward, I started college, a little place in Memphis called Rhodes College. I went back to that Civil Rights Museum on a guided tour with a person who became my faculty mentor, Dr. Charles W. McKinney Jr. And he explained everything in exquisite detail. And basically, Greg, what I decided was I wanted to study African-American history because I wanted to learn more about myself by way of learning about the place where I came from and the world historical forces that shaped that place, Memphis. So I did that for my undergrad, went to Vanderbilt University, and my dissertation was really the foundation for the book. And I'll just give you the thumbnail spiel about that. But essentially, when we think about nonviolence and the Black freedom movement, often the first person that comes to mind, Martin Luther King Jr., right? He was this great herald, this sage of nonviolence. But as King himself mentioned in the late 1950s, he went on a pilgrimage to nonviolence. So you got to remember when he first started in the Montgomery bus boycott, right? Leading this epic campaign that began the transformation of our nation, he had guns all over his house. He had bodyguards, right? In fact, Glenn Smiley, one of the white pacifists who came down to Montgomery to support the movement, he said, I couldn't find a place to sit because there were so many guns in King's house. So King was not just this person who came out of the womb committed to nonviolence. And by the way, it raises a whole bunch of larger questions, right? Because Black people in this country, like Indigenous people in Canada and other places, were actively persecuted, right? Lynching was a common form of political violence in this country from the end of the Civil War up through the middle of the 20th century. Over 4,500 African Americans lynched in cold blood. So then the question becomes, well, are Black people naturally inclined towards nonviolence? And the answer is no. When you look at the Black political tradition, people like W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, right? They're all talking about self-defense, talking about using guns, right? What did Ida B. Wells say? The Winchester rifle deserves a place of prominence in everyone's home. So, Greg, this just became a huge question for me. So I'm like, well, why, how, and why did nonviolence become this massive force for African-American folks fighting for freedom? And basically the book answers that question. And so I explained that right over the course of 5 chapters. And the long and short of it is, it was a collaboration between white pacifists and Black religious intellectuals. And there's a key figure, and I'd encourage anyone listening to the pod to go check out a man named Howard Thurman. And he really became the intellectual architect of the ideas that became the inspiration for the political tactics of nonviolent direct action. So when you read about all these ministers running around like King, like his lieutenant, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, like James M. Lawson Jr., who has a whole chapter in the book, he's on the cover of the book. All of these guys got their ideas from Howard Thurman. So I kind of tell the story of the way ideas got connected to political tactics, and then the ways in which that became a force that revolutionized the social, political, and cultural life of the United States.
Amazing. Yeah. And I'm looking at this, the index right now. And so I love the topics that are presented here. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the race and the problem of pacifism chapter. Like, tell me a little bit about this, because this really jumps out at me, because whenever we think about the racial history of the United States, which goes to, go all the way back to the settler colonialist approaches of, taking over the entire continent. It goes all the way back. What is the problem with, pacifist reactions whenever we're talking about issues of race in the continental United States and Canada as well?
For sure. Yeah. And there's a big reason that I start the book with this, because this is the crux of the issue. So long story short, when the First World War broke out in 1914, 1915, you had a number of white folks, a lot of them Quakers, but not all Quakers, many of them Protestant religious people who lived in England at the time. And they said, we're not going to go along with this war. This is a senseless war. It goes against God's will for creation. And we're just not going to cooperate, right? We're not going to fight this war. That pacifist ideology in that moment, because it's hard. I mean, as a teacher, to put yourself back into the shoes of people in 1914, 1915. The First World War was literally a world war, right? In terms of the West. And so to put yourself back in those shoes, right, for people to say, we're not going to fight this war, it just started to spread, and it came into the United States. And you basically had a lot of white religious people. And what they said, Greg, was, because Jesus said, lay the sword aside, right? If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Because Jesus practiced nonviolence, we cannot, in good conscience as Christian people, we cannot fight in the war. Now, here's the problem with pacifism. What's going on in the United States in 1914? Well, you're getting close to a period called the Red Summer of 1919, right? Where you have widespread violence, right? The Tulsa massacre that happens in the early 20th century has gotten a lot more airplay recently. It kicks off that show, The Watchmen, on HBO, if you've seen that, right?
Yeah.
There's massive, rampant, consistent, patterned, predictable violence being doled out against Black people. So if you're an African-American person in 1915, and you've got white people looking at you and saying, hey, you really need to not use violence, that becomes an unethical position. And so this is where Howard Thurman enters. And he says, it is not ethical for a white person to tell a Black person, don't use violence. When I've got white people shooting up my house, I got white people trying to lynch me for registering to vote. But what Howard Thurman says is this. He says there's something that is genius at the heart of pacifism, and that is the will to love everyone. And he says, but we've got to turn this into a creative, nonviolent force. So he says, these white people telling us we should be nonviolent, that's not going to do it. But how can we, as African-American folks, look at our religious traditions, our roots here in this country, our cultural traditions, and build something that could be powerful enough to transform the conditions of our lives, defined by Jim Crow violence, lynching, and segregation? So that begins that process. I like what's at the heart of pacifism. I don't like the unethical racial components of that. And so that's really where African-American folk, particularly Howard Thurman and others, start to say, we are going to create an active nonviolent force. And of course, they look over to Gandhi as an example. But one of the things that I point out, right, is that here in the United States, there are domestic organizing and political traditions that they draw on, that they feed from. And that includes the labor movement, right? That includes thinking about the women's rights movement. There's a whole legacy in this country going back to the settler colonialism days of nonviolent civil disobedience. So how do they draw on those traditions and pull it all together and turn it into this force of nonviolence? That's what the book is really about, but it starts with that central problem, race, and the problem of pacifism.
Absolutely amazing. There's a lot of other figures listed too in the book that maybe not everybody knows some of these names. Like you talk about James M. Lawson Jr. You talk about Pauli Murray. Some of these names are brand new to me whenever I review your work. And I'm a person who has read things. I'm not completely ignorant to a lot of the topics that you discuss in the book, but some of these are brand new to me. What are there any other overlooked figures that you feel like people should be, paying more attention to as far as like the legacy of the civil rights movement and the history of racism in the United States that you found in your research?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I'll talk just briefly about these three figures that you mentioned. And I'll start with Bayard Rustin. If you don't know who Bayard Rustin is, you do know his work because you are familiar with the March on Washington. Bayard Rustin was the organizer of the 1963 March on Washington. But there was also a 1941 March on Washington, organized by a man named A. Philip Randolph, the head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the largest and first Black union in the United States. So Bayard Rustin, he was the most important organizer for Black freedom in the 20th century. Full stop. He was also a gay man. And part of the reason that we don't know as much about Rustin today is because not only was he marginalized during his time period, meaning literally Roy Wilkins from the NAACP, he said, King, I'm not going to work with you, Martin Luther King, if you've got this guy Bayard Rustin running around here, right? And King, unfortunately, succumbed to that and said, Bayard, I got to keep you on the outside. But guess what? King's first book, Stride Towards Freedom, that he wrote after the Montgomery bus boycott, Bayard Rustin wrote that book. Bayard Rustin's fingerprints are all over the movement, but we can't acknowledge the ways in which he contributed in our popular minds because he was marginalized then and continues to be marginalized now. So that was one of the most fun parts. Oh, and I got to tell you this story. So when Bayard passed away, he was life partners with a man named Walter Nagel. And when the book came out, I got an email from Walter Nagel, and he said, I've just read your amazing book about Bayard, and I just wanted to let you know how much I appreciate it. And it's one of those things you do. That's why you do this work, right? In some ways. And so Bayard Rustin, and I'll just a teaser here. He goes to jail for 2.5 years for resisting the Second World War, the good war, the war to end fascism. He says, I'm not fighting in this war because he's a pacifist. And when he gets into jail, it's a segregated jail facility, of course. So what's the first thing he does? He organizes a desegregation campaign. Uses nonviolent civil disobedience in federal penitentiaries to try to desegregate the jails. He was that kind of good troublemaker, to quote the late, great John Lewis. So Bayard Rustin, look him up. There's a great biography about him by John D'Amelio, who's a gay historian, a historian of the gay experience. And it's called Lost Prophet. And it is so compelling. I encourage everyone to just pick that book up, listen to it on Audible, whatever you want to do. The other figure I want to talk about is Pauli Murray. Pauli Murray was trained as a lawyer in the mid-1940s. She was a phenomenal thinker, went to Howard University, grew up in North Carolina, and she started the first Freedom Ride. Before any of the other organized freedom rides, right? We think about 1961. In 1941, she and her friend, Mac, and I say friend because it was probably her lover. As it turned out, Pauli Murray was a lesbian. We would have actually used categories now to think about her as non-binary in terms of gender. Those categories weren't available to her then, but she and her friend Mac, they were asked to move to the segregated portion of a bus in 1941. They refused to do so. They got put into a jail cell in Virginia, and it became this huge hubbub. And the NAACP had been looking for a case, like, how can we test these segregation laws? Well, Pauli Murray, she creates this case, perfect opportunity, but the NAACP declines to pick it up because Pauli Murray was dressed as a boy when she was on the bus. And they thought this isn't going to be good for the image of the movement. So I write about Pauli and her life, and she becomes a key architect for nonviolent civil disobedience campaigns. She leads one in Washington, D.C. in the mid-1940s, and they desegregate lunch counters and drugstores in Washington, D.C., and they do it all through student power. She organizes students at Howard to do that. Incredibly important figure. Last thing I'll say about her legal legacy, her arguments that she developed in law school, those became the foundation for the legal challenge to end segregation in the United States, known as Brown v. Board of Education. So again, a critical figure. Her fingerprints are everywhere, but she was marginalized in her lifetime, marginalized today. Last thing I'll say is about James M. Lawson Jr. He is still alive, 93 years old. He organized the Nashville sit-in campaigns in early 1960. And often we think now about wave after wave of protesters sitting down on lunch counter stools, being arrested or beaten up, and then another wave comes in, sits down, takes their places. James M. Lawson patented that technique for overwhelming the system. And he did it in Nashville, and he did it by drawing on the traditions I've been talking about: Howard Thurman, Bayard Rustin, Pauli Murray. He stood on their shoulders. He drew on their ideas. And it was really, I argue in the book, that Nashville movement that became the tipping point, right, between a nation that was committed to segregation and racial violence and one that said, we're going to transform these conditions.
Wow, amazing. And there's so much in there about the story of how people were told to comply with certain directives and what types of resistance were made available to them, and how they processed in real time and those strategies of what it means to resist unjust actions and or comply with the ways that society was expecting them to go with. Amazing.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that overview of the book, because there's so much in this book that is relevant to what I want to go into next. And I'm going to weave us back to those key terms, compliance, resistance, here in just a minute, because you are a professor of history. You did some historical research on the place where you come from to make it a more meaningful experience, to contextualize yourself within the world, I would imagine, as well. That probably was a very helpful research that you went through. Tell me a little bit about music and the role that music plays in shaping that same thing, because I feel like there's there's something super important. You have context, but then I also feel like music has a role here too, which we're going to get into.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited about digging into the comply, resist, the terminology. And I know we'll come back to that because I've got some things that directly tie back to the civil rights movement. And I want to key in on that. And
the whole second half of the song that we'll get into in a minute too is super relevant. So go ahead and take it away.
For sure. So let me just say a little bit about music. So I grew up in Memphis, right? Home of the blues, birthplace of rock and roll, B.B. King, Stax Records, Isaac Hayes, all these amazing people, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis Presley, right? So Memphis is a music city. And that was so present for me growing up. And of course, music was central to the civil rights movement. Song, right? There's a great book by Shauna Redmond called Anthem, and she breaks down key songs, including the song We Shall Overcome and the role it played in the civil rights movement. So music, super, super important. I was introduced to punk music. We were talking earlier about our shared love for Metallica. So I was a Metallica fan, right? But the first punk show I went to, I was 15 years old. We went to a little DIY space called 1297 Madison. And it would be a place that would, live in my memory as this incredible place, not only because it was my first DIY show, because we ended up playing shows there. I was in a number of bands in Memphis. The first one was called The People's War. So if you search The People's War Memphis, the Southern Punk Archive has actually just archived our first demo tape and our first 7-inch and all that stuff. So
is that John Rush?
It was Jonathan Lee was our singer, and we put out a record on Coalition Records, is where our first 7-inch came out, a little DIY label based in California. So it was great. It was a great experience. Then I joined a band called Bury the Living. So I started playing drums. And I think fans will appreciate this. I started playing drums, and I remember the first time I got together, I was like, how did that go? Did it sound okay? And they were like, sounds great, man. Just play faster.
Yeah.
And so that became the mantra. And I'll return back to that with my cover that I did with Comply Resist. It's a fast song. So that was how I really got into it. Eventually got into a band called Pez with two Z's, probably one of the better known bands. They were a touring band on BYO Records based out of California, the Stern brothers out in California. They put out 2 LPs with BYO, and one of those was recorded by Steve Albini in Chicago. And so, ended up getting into Pez, a melodic hardcore band, and then played in a band called Akasha. It was kind of Pez light when Marvin was in Chicago and we were still in Memphis. So did a number of tours, did 3 or 4 US tours, a couple of West Coast jaunts, did a European tour with Bury the Living. And so playing punk rock hardcore music, right, is it's ingrained in who I am and what I've been about. And I'll just say one thing about doing that in Memphis. Memphis has been known for all the things I mentioned: soul, rock and roll, BB King and blues. But one of the things that has been under-recognized, and this is actually the core of my second book project, is the contributions that Memphis made to independent and punk rock music. There was a club in Memphis called the Antenna Club. That started in 1981 and ran until 1995. And everybody on the independent touring circuit in the 1980s, REM, Black Flag, the Bad Brains, later Jawbreaker and Green Day, Circle Jerks, like every DIY band that was touring in the United States went through Memphis in the 1980s. And the impact of that in the Antenna Club was to create this vibrant punk scene. So that by the time I come around, right, I'm standing on the shoulders of all these people who have been engaged in punk rock music for decades. And Memphis produces a couple of punk rock bands, some of which are not going to be unfamiliar to people here. His Hero Is Gone came from Memphis. A sort of crust punk band is what they'd be called. Eventually became Tragedy. I'm sure people know Tragedy, based in Portland. Those guys came from Memphis. From Ashes Rise, those guys were from Nashville, right? But they played in Memphis all the time. Mekano Christ, they were from Little Rock, which was just 2 hours away. So Memphis was this hub for nationally significant punk rock music. And that's part of the story I want to tell with the next book.
Amazing. Well, okay. So I did mention the name John Rush a minute ago. I went to the Southern Punk Archive, and John Rush is the founder of the Southern Punk Archive and the Southern Documentary Project.
John Rash. Yes.
Oh, yeah. John Rash. I'm actually
Great dude.
Misreading it. Yes. John Rash. Hello, John Rash, friend of the podcast.
Amazing guy.
Amazing. Awesome. That is so cool. Where does Propagandhi sort of enter your musical journey along the way?
I'm laughing because I'll tell this story first. I actually reached out to Propagandhi in 2002, maybe 2003. It was right after Today's Empires. And I was like, you guys are my favorite band. I play in bands. Can you come here? We want to play a show with you. And I didn't hear back, but it's neither here nor there. But my fandom for them has been going on 20 plus years. So the first album that I heard was How to Clean Everything. And, Haile Selassie Up Your Ass was just kind of this, amazing song for me because, you're a young kid and you're like, yeah, F everything. And religion's this like source of evil. And by the way, I love Chris's new version of that. And I love the way he owned his own kind of racism, right? Related to the original iteration of that and how he thought about the Bad Brains and all that stuff. So I love how he evolved, but that was the first album that I heard. And, just the line, like, you can stick that flag up your fucking ass. Like just all of that stuff just really appealed to 15-year-old Anthony. Right. So I'm hearing Propagandhi in the late 90s. Less Talk was not my first album that I was introduced to. And in fact, it was an album that I only came to much later. In fact, the album that really captured my imagination was Today's Empires. And I remember in particular, right, just, Fuck the Border. And then of course, I like the Party Fucking Hard. I like my rock and roll the same. I was a young kid drinking too much. I dropped out of high school, was legally emancipated. I have this like whole long history, right? But when I heard that, I was living in an apartment with some friends of mine and just absolutely loved the direction that it was clear the band was taking in the early 2000s. Yeah. And basically, Greg, since that point, I've gotten every album right when it comes out, get super into it. I'm a huge Potemkin City Limits fan. It's not my favorite Propagandhi album, but it probably is like maybe my number 2 record. Supporting Cast, of course, Victory Lap actually is, I think, maybe their best record. So yeah, I've been a fan for 25-ish years. And just continue to grow, honestly, in appreciation and love for the band.
Have you ever gotten to see them live before?
Yeah, so I saw them twice, both on the Victory Lap tour. I don't know how I went so long without seeing them. Although I will say, Greg, I'm not sure they ever played in Memphis.
Yeah, they're hard to see live.
And so and I'm not sure how often, frankly, they even came to the South, to be honest with you. So I saw them in Nashville in 2017. It was pre-pandemic, maybe 2018. Victory Lap, fantastic. And the thing that impressed me after that show, they came back out on stage and like were talking to people in the audience. And I just had never ever seen a band do that. It just, that blew me away when I saw them. And then the second time I saw them was at a club that has the unfortunate name of the Oriental in Denver. And I was right up front. It was on the Iron Sheik tour. So was that pre-pandemic?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, pre-pandemic. So maybe like 2019, early 2020.
Yeah.
And I was right up front and just absolutely loving life. So yeah, I've seen them a couple times.
Amazing. So, you know, over the course of the last couple of years, as you and I have threatened to do a podcast together for so very, very long now, Comply Resist was always the thing that you had landed on. And so before we talk about like the contents of the song and revisit and tie in the first half of our conversation about your book and your research and your work, you told me that you're going to work on this cover for Comply Resist. And I feel as if this has been a very difficult journey for you. And I am just like ecstatic to hear the story of you attempting to single-handedly do a cover of Comply Resist. So tell me all about this.
All right. So yes, I did create a cover of Comply Resist, and I am doing it all by myself. So since the pandemic took place and I've been out here in Colorado away from Memphis, I've been playing music, but on my own. So I have drum kit set up. It took me a while to save up the money to get all the audio interface for 6 drum mics, to be able to get Logic Pro set up, just to get everything kind of off the ground, but recorded 10 demos on songs and under the name Luminous Darkness. And none of it's been released, but wrote 10 original songs, and I think that stuff will come out probably in the next 6 to 8 months or whatever.
Sweet.
Yeah, I can send you some of those demos, or even just,
I would love to hear them.
And I was hoping before the pod happened that I'd have like a band camp up and all that, but yeah. So if folks are interested, I'm happy to send you a link. If you like any of the Propaganda stuff, you'll like this stuff.
Cool.
So I had finally got everything set up. And then I was like, yeah, I'm going to record a cover of Comply Resist. And I think we decided we'd work on that like in the last 6-8 months. That was a more recent goal.
Yeah.
Because I think more folks you've been interviewing have been doing covers. So I was like, okay, how the hell am I going to do this? Right. And so typically what I do when I record is I start with the drums. So let me back up. I'll write riffs on the guitar.
Yeah.
And then I'll even write second guitar stuff over it, and I'll just record that, and I'll have the template. But then to record it by yourself, you have to be able to record the drums first. And so with Comply Resist, I had to play all the drum parts first with nothing else, just a click track. And so that took a while to get the drums right, because it's a hard song to play on the drums. It's very fast. And when you hear the cover, I think it'll come out with this episode, you'll hear I ended up playing it faster than the actual song itself. Just because, I was playing Nuclear Speed. So laid that down. And then the guitars were not easy to learn. And there's a lot going on with the guitars. And there's, of course, 2 guitars. And so being able to then lay the first guitar track down and then lay the second guitar track down and try to get it right. And I think I got it like probably 95% right. By the way, I used the Sheet Happens Propaganda Victory Lap tablature for that, because I mean, I'm not a person who could figure that out. So
yeah, shout out to Luke Hoskin from Sheet Happens. Yeah,
great interview y'all have done with him too. So yeah, then I got what I had to finish was the bass. And got the Sheet Happens for that, right? And then laying down the vocals, and not having the pretense that I could sing like Chris. I mean, that's the thing. Whenever you're doing a cover song, you just kind of have to find your own voice, and
you got to be yourself. Totally.
Exactly. Kind of follow the path that was laid down there. But yeah, it was quite the project, and took longer than expected, and doing it all by myself, recording it all at my house. But man, it was fun. I felt really satisfied after it was done, because I was like, this was some hard ass work.
It's totally incredible. I love the visuals of you like going through this. Was it just madness? Was it just completely maddening trying to get through this? Because Jord told me when I interviewed him that this is one of the hardest songs for him to play live. Like he kind of has to brace himself whenever Propaganda is about to play this tune live, because it's so tough.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought a lot about Jord throughout this process, because it is not easy, and it's extremely demanding. And we always called, like, when you're really working on a song in band practice, we call it gym practice. And this was a gym practice to end all gym practices, because first of all, I wanted to make sure that I was getting the drum inflections right, because there's a lot of drum inflections throughout the song that articulate alongside the vocals. So what I had to do, Greg, to start, is I had to write all the vocals out on big sticky Post-it notes, like those big, like 3 foot by 3 foot, put them on the wall in front of me, so that I could not just count, but actually kind of follow along with the lyrics to make sure I hit the little inflections as I went along. And then, of course, like, there's just a lot of stops throughout the song that need to be extremely precise.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, it took me a minute to get the beat down, because I'm used to doing kind of like, but this song is really like, it's really like, it's a more repetitive, just basically single stroke bass drum note.
Yeah.
And so when I started to play the song, I was like, oh, it's actually it's less complex than you think, but actually playing it in that simple way was much harder for me.
Yeah. So you're used to doing that single and then that double rebound.
Exactly.
Kick, that punk beat that you always hear on like those like old, like those like Ryan Green records, where the bass drum is like so loud in the mix on like something like No Use for a Name, Making Friends.
Exactly. You hit it right on the head. It's not a double kick pretty much throughout the whole song.
Yeah.
It's just it's not really D beat, because you're not doing the snare drum on the upstroke, but it's just there's some precision to it in its simplicity that was admirable. And I tried to nail all the drum fills that Jord does. So I was really trying to replicate that, because I mean, they're perfect. And honestly, Greg, what I'll say, like, having played the song, and I mean, I felt this way even beforehand, but especially so afterwards. I think this is a perfect song. I think Comply Resist is a perfect punk rock song. To me, it is beyond reproach. Not just the execution, not just the composition, not just the lyrics, not just the interplay between guitars, the complexity of the bass, the vocal approach, everything. It's perfect. And I know that Chris did he did a pod about this. He's done the Comply Resist pod, right? For his Patreon page. And I think he thinks pretty highly of it as well. In fact, I think he mentioned on that podcast, he said, I listened to that song and I'm kind of amazed that I was a part of it.
Yeah. I think that songs like this one and like Duplicate Keys of Caro, like whenever he does his Q&As on his Patreon, like I submitted a question one time, like how does Duplicate Keys of Caro rank for you as a part of the songs that you've been a part of? Do you like this one? He's like, oh yeah, I like this one a lot. And I kind of feel like he feels exactly the same about Comply Resist. And then when he passed this one past Beeve, when they were demoing it, Beeve's like, don't change anything. So this is one that I feel like the people within the band really feel like, I think they feel like they nailed this one, you know?
Oh my gosh, yeah. And as they should. I mean, as someone who's played music for a long time, I have a few songs I feel that way about, and it's rare. I mean, I've played and recorded a ton of songs. I'm like, that's a cool song. But there's a select few where I'm like, oh yeah, that's a jam. One of those, I'll say, Pez, we recorded a cover of Leatherface's I Like Watching You Sleep.
Amazing.
Yeah, from their Horsebox album. And that's a song I feel that way about. I think we nailed that one too. So yeah, it's a dude. I mean, it's a perfect punk rock tune, man. I always love hearing it whenever it comes on. I don't skip it. I enjoy it. And that's still true however many 5-6 years later.
Amazing. Well, I'm really glad you bring up Leatherface. I don't think they've ever been mentioned on this podcast before, but I got to see Leatherface play live with Hot Water Music like 20 years ago at the Creepy Crawl in St. Louis. And I actually saw Leatherface live just totally by chance of going to see Hot Water Music. So yeah, pretty sweet.
Listen, Pez toured with Leatherface and Hot Water Music in the 90s. They may have been on that tour, actually, that you saw 20 years ago. But the one thing I'll just say, Leatherface is my favorite band, second only to Propagandhi. It's kind of 1A and 1B. And I just have to give a shout out, Andrew Lang, also known as Laney, the drummer for Leatherface, on all of their albums except their very last one, passed away this week. So really sad to see that. Of course, Dickie Hammond passed away, and Frankie Stubbs is really the only surviving member of Leatherface still around. So sad week for punk rock music, man. But if you don't know Leatherface and you're listening to this podcast, I'd actually encourage you to start with the Hot Water Music Leatherface Split LP. It's a really good place to start. Frankie's voice takes a little getting used to, but it is, to me, some of the best punk rock you'll hear.
Amazing. Okay, well, great. That's awesome. Okay, so Anthony, in the very beginning of our conversation, we talked a lot about your research, and we talked a lot about the history of, nonviolence and the history of the civil rights movement in the United States. We talked a lot about what was going on with the messiness between nonviolence and resistance, right? So we've got the name of this song, which I think really ties in very well to a lot of your own career and research, and just so many incredible connections. Tell me a little bit about your connection to the title of this particular song.
For sure. Thank you for this opportunity, because there's a direct connection to exactly what I think the sentiment of this song is about, between my research and between what Chris is writing here. And I just want to sort of take you to the portion of the song, the very last line of the song, or towards the end: comply, ? Resist, ? No difference. Resist, ? Comply, ? You die. Now, why is this important? I want to share a quote from Charles Payne. He's a luminary civil rights historian. He wrote a book called I've Got the Light of Freedom. If you like anything of what I've talked about today with civil rights history, buy this book. Get it on Audible. It's called I've Got the Light of Freedom. It's the best book about the civil rights movement. Full stop. I have a PhD. People can disagree, but it is. In that book, Charles Payne talks about the organizing tradition in Mississippi. And one of the things he writes about in terms of the long organizing tradition among Black folks in Mississippi, he has to give you this backdrop of violence. You can't understand what it looks like to resist, to try to transform the conditions that are ordering your life, to try to change Jim Crow, unless you understand the context of violence, of segregation, of Jim Crow. And one of the things that he says there is, he says, when it came to violence against Black people in Mississippi, the point was, there didn't have to be a point. You could be killed because some ignorant white man didn't like the color of your shirt. You could be killed because he didn't like the way you drove a wagon. The point was, there didn't have to be a point. Why is this important? Why does this relate to comply, resist? When you think about these systems of social control, right? So in this case, Chris is writing a little bit about indigeneity, but he's also making explicit references to Tamir Rice, right? In terms of a toy gun, right? When you look at these systems of social control, there's all these rules. So go into a school, right, and learn English and forget your native language. Learn our religious customs. Abandon your religious customs, right? Comply with white supremacy. Make sure that you cross the street when a white person is coming. Make sure that you drink at the white water fountain, right, or the black water fountain, rather. Make sure you follow these rules. But you know what, Greg? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you follow the rules. It doesn't matter whether you comply. It doesn't matter whether you resist, because when power has absolute power, when it's drunk on power, it can do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, because it sets the rules and it decides when, even if you followed all the rules, I'm still going to punish you. And that, to me, is what is bound up at the heart of the entire history of colonialism. It's what's at the heart of segregation and Jim Crow in this country. Yes, you can be perfect. You can dress nice. You can get a good education. You could do all the right things. And guess what? At the end of the day, it still doesn't matter. Comply, resist, no difference. Resist, comply, you die.
Oh boy. Yeah, there's so, and this song has two halves, right? Do you feel like there's like a first story and a second story in this song?
For sure. Yeah. And of course, I pulled up the letter or the facts, the essay that
Sure.
Christopher Hitchens wrote here. And if folks haven't seen that, it's from 1992, the Christopher Hitchens essay on the anti-Columbus movement. And the song explicitly references direct quotations from this Christopher Hitchens essay.
Yeah.
And so that's just the intro. That's where the song starts, right? And some of this stuff, right? My colorful, exotic friend, respectable, well-spoken, unlike the rest of them. As you know, I'm colorblind. You're a credit to your kind. That stuff's not coming out of the Christopher Hitchens essay, but what it does is it reflects the tone of the essay. And so I think Chris Hanna does an incredible job, right? In introducing us to that vis-a-vis this kind of imaginary, right? This imaginary perspective. But then he gets right into it, right? Eden, empire, kingdom, right? Those are directly out of the Christopher Hitchens essay, right? And so he's drawing right on that. And so is that next section, the boundless epoch we've bestowed upon your savage empty lands. Of course, mistakes were made. As far as human progress goes, welcome to a slightly higher plane. Innovation, opportunity, those are words directly out of the Hitchens essay, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is treaties we broke, lands we filched, settlements put to the torch, children's, we abused, right? Those are coming right out of the Christopher Hitchens essay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really the first part of this song, right? And to me, gosh, and I know y'all get into this, but the way the music interplays with the lyrics, right? The treaties that we broke, the lands that we filched, like the intensity of it. You feel the intensity of it. You think, my God, right? I can't believe we did that. So the song is just set up through that first half, right? In this kind of amazing way. And then you're right, it pivots in the second half of the song, right? And this is where you start to see some references, not just to indigenous communities or the Canadian legacy of colonialism. Now we're starting to talk about a U.S. context. We're starting to talk about anti-Blackness, right? The funny names you give your kids, the silly ways you do your hair, the jungle music that you blare, right?
Yeah.
And you can see the ways in which those things all connect, but specifically, even right before that, don't play with a toy gun, don't change lanes without signaling, right?
Yeah.
Those things, like literally, those were at the crux of what led to unarmed African-American men being murdered by police at police stops. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm from Memphis. And so Tyree Nichols recently being beaten to death by 5 African-American police officers. And I don't know if we have time to get into the complexity of all that, but certainly have thoughts about that, right? That is just another example. And Chris makes a direct reference to this. And what's actually the most sad part about it all, right? Don't change lanes without signaling. Don't play with a toy gun. It's not like he's just talking about those things that happened before 2017.
Mm-hmm.
This is stuff that continues to happen repeatedly over and over again. It's patterned, it's predictable, it's consistent. So yes, there are, I think, 2 sort of separate sections of the song. The first being around the anti-indigeneity coming out of the Chris Hitchens piece, and then the second starting to reference the U.S. context.
Yeah, well, and you think about the toy gun too. It's not even just men; it's children, right? So we have the Tamir Rice reference with the toy gun is what I'm seeing there too. So it's across age. It doesn't matter if you are a literal child or if you are a grown up man in your 30s or 40s. It's just kind of transcends age too.
Trayvon Martin was 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, 17 years old. Right? He's not an adult.
Right.
I mean, so, and yeah, you mentioned Tamir Rice. I mean, these are children, right? 12-year-old African-American young boy.
Yeah.
So no, you're right. You're right. That's an important clarifier. We're not just talking about men or adults.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you have a personal history with the work of Christopher Hitchens when you were younger at all?
I didn't. I did do some reading about him in preparation for the podcast today, and just seems like an extremely complex person.
Yeah.
Whose views evolved and shifted over the course of his life. And it wasn't super consistent, right? Was super supportive of LGBT rights, right? But also super like Second Amendment. I mean, there's just a lot of ways that when I looked at him as a thinker, he didn't appear to fit into a Manichaean paradigm, right? Either one thing or the other.
Yeah, I think that he kind of thrived in that space. Like he was a very well-known contrarian figure where I think that he kind of reveled in the active argument itself. Like I think that that's kind of where he thrived and oftentimes would kind of lean into that. So I'm wondering, I was thinking about this earlier when I was talking to somebody else about this song. And I was wondering if maybe he would change on his views of this 1992 thing, which was released literally on the 500-year anniversary of Columbus's voyages in 1492. So it's just one of those things that I knowing his complexity, I'm wondering if there would be a shift in his tone over time and a softening or a doubling down.
Yeah,
which obviously we can never know.
But one thing I'll go to, first of all, I appreciate you saying he kind of appreciated being the contrarian and maybe thrived in that space, because when you look at the last sentence of this essay, this is what he says: the transformation of part of the northern part of this continent into, quote, America inaugurated a nearly boundless epoch of opportunity and innovation, right? That's where Chris gets this, and thus deserves to be celebrated with great vim and gusto, with or without the participation of those who wish they had never been born. That sentence in and of itself, it really lends itself to this question that you asked. So, well, how would he feel like if he was to look in our current context, right, and be affected by this? I think on the one hand, he would say, listen, there's no doubt life expectancy, right, has increased for people since we colonized this area. There's more opportunities to grow and to do different kinds of things. You don't have to just be a farmer, right? Like I think he would sort of double down, right, on some of those things. And at the same time, you can see why he's being intentionally provocative with that statement by erasing, let's be clear, erasing the ways in which indigenous people organized life, society, culture, and politics previous to the arrival, right, or the encounter, right, of European Americans. There's an excellent book by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. I'm sure you've read this one, An Indigenous People's History of the United States. And if folks want to understand a little bit more about what this place was like before colonial forces arrived here, take a look at that. And one thing that stands out for me is they curated the forests. Like, think about that for a minute. They knew they were dependent upon the land. And so they didn't overhunt. They didn't overfish. They literally trimmed the forest. There were highways that went across the United States. Some of them were game trails. These were opportunities for migration and movement and resettlement and these kinds of things. There was such a care for the land, a stewardship and a connection, right, with the land here that has been absolutely, completely obliterated and lost. And that connects directly to the ways in which propaganda, I think about veganism and our connections, right, to animals, right? Because essentially we just obliterate any thought of you're just eating this meat out of a package, or even worse, off of a plate that's been cooked for you. You're not thinking about the processes that go into it, the exploitation, right? Not just of animals, but also of land. So when I think about your question, I mean, I think that Christopher Hitchens would probably still remain the contrarian, but you look at that last little section there, and he's essentially arguing that our way of life and the fact that we established that way of life on top of an older way of life in and of itself is a good thing. I don't know if he would back off of that perspective today, given what I've read about him, but who knows? Maybe he would, just to be a contrarian.
You never know. You never know. Anthony, what a remarkable and amazing conversation about Comply Resist. I loved hearing your story of struggling to get through the creation of it and how hard of a song this is to work on. And just what a thrill that must have been for you. I hope that you at least enjoyed it as well. And I loved hearing your thoughts on how your own research connects directly to just the title, but both aspects of what this song is getting at throughout the last 500 years on this continent. It's just a real thrill to hear the way that your work and mind connect to what the song is about and what Chris was going for. It's just so cool to see the connections between what you do on a day-to-day basis and what the band was talking about in the song.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Greg, for having me. And one last thing I'll say is, the comply, the resist thing, right? Like if you hear that and you sort of hear what we're talking about, oh, I'm going to follow the rules, I'm going to defy the rules, but it doesn't really matter what I do. If that doesn't make sense to you, one thing that I would encourage you to do is to really think about the power and the privilege that you bring by way of the social status that you maintain, right? And to really think about, well, if I've never had to consider that, the fact that if I follow all the rules or if I don't follow the rules, there's going to be negative consequences either way, right? Think about our positionality within the society that we hold, the power, the privilege that gives us the opportunity to not have to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just where I want to leave it.
Amazing. Well, Dr. Anthony Siracusa, thank you so much for joining me to chat about all your work and the work of this amazing band that we both love so much. It's been a real thrill.
Thank you, my friend. Keep up the good work. Love the pod.
The silly talk of resurgence, ceremony communion with an unconquered natural world. Tell me, where is your gratitude for all we've done for you? This paradise in earth, empire, kingdom, this mercy back we bestowed.
Dr. Jeremy Cohen, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Thank you very much. I am very happy to be here.
I'm delighted that you're here too, and I'm so glad that you're excited. It's very wonderful. Happy Friday. So, Jeremy, I'm wondering if you can just spend a moment and introduce yourself a little bit to the audience so they know a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world.
Yeah, so I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Religious Studies at McMaster University in Canada. And I am an anthropologist of religion. My main research focuses on new religious movements and communities who are trying to live forever. Either they claim that they have figured out the secret of living forever, or they are hoping for medical and technological advances in the future that will allow them to do that. I also run a very popular death and dying resource with my wife called talkdeath.com. And I get to teach all of the fun classes at our university. So I teach classes on death and dying, cults and conspiracy theories, spirits, ghosts, and demons, culture and religion, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Very cool. I love some of the things that I've read. So as you know, I'm sort of involved in the religious studies world as well with my other podcast, Classical Ideas. And we'll get you over there sometime as well. It's really funny to me that you're a religion professor and you're coming on my punk rock podcast before my religion podcast. So I just thought that was really funny. But I love some of the stuff that I've read. Like I used to make my students read stuff by Sushila Blackman, where it was death poems of great beings, like Zen masters dying and writing their final poem on their deathbed. I used to make them read some stuff by, I think it was Frank Ostanesky, who's a Buddhist teacher who works a lot with grieving. So that's a really fascinating field that you're in, and I'm really excited to chat about that on the other podcast in hopefully the not too distant future. I just think it's funny that you're a religion guy and so am I, but we're talking about music instead.
I mean, I wouldn't want it any other way. Honestly, I'm happy to start with this and then move on to the quote unquote more serious stuff.
Absolutely. Well, Jeremy, tell me a little bit about your background with music and getting into, the stuff that leads you to being a fan of Propaganda.
Yeah. So, I got into punk, probably skate punk, and unfortunately ska, and similar genres when I was, 12 or 13. And I probably started listening to Propaganda, around then when I was 13 or 14. And, they were, as you're well aware, grouped in with, other skate punk bands of their era. And I didn't really make the connection between their music and politics at the time. I was definitely the person that they describe in Anti-Manifesto, right? That was just kind of like Bob, listening along and not really paying attention to any of the, the meaning behind the songs. But yeah, I started listening to, or listening to Propaganda was probably the first time that I was ever really introduced to radical politics. And I think that really came to influence the music that I was listening to generally, starting to listen to Bad Religion and Oi Polloi and I don't know, not that those are three very different, types of punk, but yeah, it wasn't very long before the Propaganda's message started really creeping into my head. And Propaganda has been, I think, really pivotal to the trajectory that my life has taken. And I think that a lot of that really is rooted in today's empires, tomorrow's ashes. I think that was, there was a lot of things happening at that time, geopolitically, but also just in my life personally. And Propaganda gave me a language to be able to think about politics, think about my life, and think about even 9/11, think about September 11th. And, I grew up in a really small town outside of Montreal in a school that had 300 people. Nobody was interested in punk. Nobody was interested in politics. Nobody was interested in any of these topics. And so Propaganda kind of became my refuge. And especially given that, following 9/11 into the war in Iraq, the kind of the dominant idea amongst my peers at that time was, we just need to bomb the Muslim world as a solution to terrorism. This is the language that my peers at the time are using, and Propaganda gave me a way to think differently, and it gave me a way to see that all political struggles are connected. Racism, police brutality, animal rights, feminism, any other kind of form of violence. It was a really kind of foundational part of my life. And I'll just kind of end off by saying that, I've been, and I'm not saying this as to pat myself on the back, but I've been, vegan now for 17 years. And it is Propaganda's fault.
Wow. I every time we've had a professor on here, I have to stop and wonder, did Propaganda have an influence in making this person pursue an academic path and like a life of the mind? Do you blame them for your career trajectory?
I think so. I think honestly, I really do. And it is because of the like I said, the language that it gave me. Given where I grew up, I always aspired to move to the city, move to Montreal, and find a group of friends that shared my values. And those were the values that Propaganda introduced me to. And so I really do see a connection there. I can trace that trajectory very clearly.
Amazing. Well, Jeremy, I've known for a long time that you were a big fan of the band, just based on Twitter encounters and interaction like that over the last couple of years. And so you have to understand my joy and my shock when I began researching the song Comply Resist from Victory Lap, and I found an article written by you very shortly after the release of Victory Lap. So Victory Lap, as everybody knows, came out September 29th, 2017. And 4 days later, October 3rd, 2017, you release a short article on your website called Christopher Hitchens, An Ode to False Idols. So your turnaround speed is stunning. I mean, incredible. When I realized how close to the release day of the record is, I was like, wow, Jeremy connected with this song instantly. In a way that, like, I'm much more of a slow burn. So I'm glad that you had such an instantaneous response to it. So before we'll get into the article in a second, but before we go there, I want to know about your background with the work of Christopher Hitchens, the subject of the song "Comply Resist."
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, that quick of a turnaround time, not always a great thing. Sometimes it's good to sit on material for a little bit, but as we'll get into, I felt very strongly about the topic of the song. Honestly, my background is also in the New Atheist movement. I really became interested in the New Atheist movement sometime around 2006, 2007. I think the first book I read was Sam Harris's Letter to a Christian Nation, followed by Dawkins' Blind Watchmaker, and then God is Not Great by Hitchens. And I read Hitchens' book and then, really fell in love with his work, in this topic. The critique that the New Atheists were making at the time really resonated with me as someone who is still trying to find their way in the world. And I'm someone, I have a learning disability, and sometimes in the past, I felt very insecure about my intellectual abilities, and the New Atheist kind of gave me a direction that I could really focus on, which has always been a difficult thing for me. Focus has always been a very difficult thing for me, and so it gave me a direction in that way. And at the time, their argument that so much of the world's problems lie at the feet of religion seemed like the logical conclusion to, my years as a teenage anarchist and, the weird kind of post 9/11 left-wing political conspiracism that was really popular at the time and something that I was really attracted to as a teenager, and this kind of, I guess, unthinking distrust of mainstream narratives. And religion seemed like the most mainstream narrative that our society has. And so there was this kind of contrarian spirit that Hitchens definitely helped, create that really spoke to me. The New Atheists were actually, and Hitchens especially, were what motivated me to start taking courses in religious studies, because I wanted to learn how to better debate religionists. I was watching all these YouTube videos of debates between Hitchens and various priests and rabbis and imams, and I wanted to learn how to better debate religionists. So I took some courses. I took a course on the history and kind of cultural context of the evolution creationism debate. I took courses on the religious movements, learned the historical critical method of biblical scholarship, and learned about the anthropology of religion, and realized that the religion that the New Atheists were pointing to is this straw man, right? And then the idea that Hitchens has of religion, is this straw man. They are reacting to American evangelical Christianity and this Western fear of Islam, which then kind of came in to stand for religion generally. And nothing will disabuse you of these sorts of ideas than taking courses in religious studies.
There's so much parallel between your experience and mine. Like, the Sam Harris's first book and God is Not Great were books that I actually read both multiple times. Like, I reread them, and there's, looking back on it, it's just such an interesting way. But I'm really glad that is part of your story that shares with mine, because looking back on some of the things that those guys have done in the years since that I kind of like wasn't really super into or agreed with, it made me a little squeamish about my own fawning over them years ago. Like, you know what I mean? Does that make sense to you? Like, I used to really revere these guys, and so it really kind of was interesting to watch where they went next, and also to discover other things about them that I wasn't so like adoring of, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I always feel like I need to add a qualifier when I'm talking about any of these authors. I really was into new atheism, but I've grown away from it, which is true, but I do feel this insecurity around it because of the deplorable ideas that many of these people have, and now realizing the context in which this conversation was occurring, right? And at the time, it really, for me, was about religion as something that we could point to, as something that exists in the world that we could point to, and now knowing that this is really just a reaction against kind of two specific strains of religion. Yeah, I sometimes feel a bit embarrassed about it.
Yeah, and I definitely did a lot of the same types of things as you, where I was watching endless amounts of YouTube speeches by Christopher Hitchens. I found him to be extraordinarily charming and compelling and engaging, and I loved how he always had the suit on with no tie, and he was just always like swooping his hair back, and he was just like this, like kind of like this like party guy, where he's like, you would hear stories about him being really drunk and his editors like sitting him down in a chair, and he would just start typing while he was like pretty smashed. And then they would be like, well, what he came out with while he was totally wasted is doesn't need any editing and it's published ready. So you just have to, I just found the lore of the guy to be kind of interesting as well whenever I was reading a lot of his work a long time ago.
Likewise, before he was diagnosed with cancer, there was a Vanity Fair spread with Hitchens, and they took all of these photographs of him kind of doing his day-to-day business, taking a shower, shaving. And in all the pictures, he had a glass of scotch in one hand and a cigarette in the other, in the shower. And I feel like that just encapsulates him and his personality in so many ways. And yeah, same. I feel the same way. I was and still am blown away by his intelligence, by his wit, the way that he thinks, with all of its faults, I think is admirable. There's just something about his aura that is so compelling, and his history and his travels, the people that he's met, his recall, the way in which he can quote, authors and quote these quote friends of his at will is something I'll never be able to do.
Yeah, I couldn't either. Well, okay, so let's talk a little bit about comply resist. So if you were like me, you didn't even have any idea that this 1992 article even existed. So first of all, it came out when I was 9, and the only thing I had ever really read by him was God Is Not Great, Portable Atheist, and later his Mortality collection. I tried to read his like arguably book, but it's like 1,000 pages long, and like holding the thing was physically uncomfortable to me. So it became just a thing that sat on my shelf for years and years, unread entirely because it's just too unwieldy to even hold. But, whenever Chris Hanna starts talking about this 1992 article, I had never heard of it. So tell me a little bit about your process of maybe with that article, discovering that article, if you knew it existed, or if the propaganda thing was the introduction to this article to you, and then what you kind of went through in order to kind of figure out what we was talking about.
Yeah, so I also had no idea. I was 7 maybe when that article, 6 or 7 when that article came out. So yeah, obviously I had no idea. And even when I was going to anti-war protests in 2003 and in the lead up to the war in Iraq, I had no idea. I mean, I had no idea who Hitchens was. And so I had no idea that he was a huge supporter of that war effort. And so, yeah, the Propaganda song was the first time that I was introduced to this. And yeah, I mean, this piece is pure Hitchens. right? It has this kind of self-assurance and ego to it that all of his work has. The problem is that it is attached to a pretty abhorrent idea, right? And it speaks to, I think, a certain trend among certain intellectual circles that one's expertise in one domain means that one can be an authority in others, right? Which, to be fair, is sort of the role of the op-ed author generally.
Mm-hmm.
But, reading that piece after hearing about it, thanks to Comply Resist, I remember reading it just thinking, it really would have been so easy for Hitchens to have just said nothing.
Right.
Yeah, he didn't like this. Like, why? And we'll talk, I think, a little bit about it in a bit. But there was a kind of larger cultural context in which it was published that I was not aware of until recently. But yeah, I do find it funny that given the new atheist movement of the 2000s was largely a reactionary movement against, a strain of anti-intellectualism in the United States, Hitchens' article was very much part of this larger strand of conservative anti-intellectualism that's couched in patriotism and exceptionalism as well.
Mm. So, tell me about your experience of going through the song when Comply Resist comes out. Because, you had no idea this thing existed. All of a sudden, Chris Hanna's like, circa 1992, Hitchens faxes copied through. So you're like, Hitchens, whoa, because that's what happened to me. I was like, what are you talking about? Hitchens, I know that name. Tell me a little bit about your process of going through the song and kind of figuring out what was happening.
Yeah, so I just, I was, I think, a year into my PhD at McMaster, and I remember sitting on the public bus on my way to school, and the song comes on, and my first thought is, I wonder who this Hitchens fellow they mention might possibly be. I didn't really make the connection right away, and then that was followed by shit. I think they mean Christopher Hitchens. So yeah, I got home that night. I looked up the article. And I remember putting my head against the desk and just thinking, "Oh my God, why?" And I had actually just, I think the week before, I had just finished discussing with my students in tutorial. We had talked about the former Canadian Conservative Senator Lynn Bayek, who kind of famously in 2017 made this statement telling Indigenous peoples in Canada to, that they should trade their status card for Canadian citizenship, and then published all these letters on her website about, from Canadians talking about how the residential school system wasn't that bad and people just need to get over it. And so I had just finished talking about this with students when this song is brought to my attention. And it was a bit of a shock. I wasn't surprised, and I'm not surprised that this is something Hitchens published, but I'm disappointed.
So I'm curious a little bit about your thoughts on the article too. So one of the main things that, first of all, it's really interesting that Chris lifts lines from the actual essay for the lyrics: treaties broken, lands filched, settlements put to the torch. So Chris actually uses pieces of the actual essay for his lyrics in the song, but then the approach isn't what listeners of the song might take away, because Hitchens's argument is that the things that are the treaties broken, lands filched, burned settlements are being done by Indigenous tribes against others. So when we think about that, we would immediately think of the colonization of the continent and, the settler colonialism and the violence that happened against Indigenous tribes. We would think about that as being the example, but Hitchens is saying, no. The major problem was actually Indigenous on Indigenous violence. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on what he's saying there. Because obviously from a 2023 lens, anybody who's listening to this podcast probably has a very clear stance on that. It's one of the most commonly used conservative arguments in the United States about communities of color committing violence upon each other to, just perpetuate racist stereotypes in the United States. So it's a really tropey thing that he's doing here. And so I'm just curious on your thoughts on it.
I mean, I think it's even more insidious than that. It is part of a larger narrative that justified even the African slave trade, right? Slavery was justified because African tribes would enslave each other. And so they already knew about slavery. They were already putting other tribes into perpetual slavery. So it is fine for us to do the same. We are just doing what they would do to themselves, right? And this is something that was used very early on to justify the slave trade, and was used by colonialists in Africa to actually get more slaves. They would pit tribes against each other in order to, gain more, more individuals for the slave trade. Sorry, I don't necessarily always have the best language to be able to speak about that history. But yeah, so Hitchens is part of this much larger history of colonial justification for this kind of violence. And I really love the way that Propaganda chose to use his words against him, right? And it's beautiful.
It's amazing. And something else that Hitchens does in the essay that is worth discussing a little bit is that he says that the anti-Columbus movement is faintly sinister. So we're talking about this issue, and like anybody who's been paying attention to the news the last 10 years or so have seen Columbus statues toppled in parks during protests, like the Columbus statue here in Buffalo, New York. We have a Columbus Park right on the waterfront down by the Niagara River, and the statue is gone. It was like paint dumped over it, and it was removed, and now there's just like a box like where like the statue like plinth would be. And so we've seen this movement, but he calls the folks who are protesting against the veneration of Columbus faintly sinister in this essay, which I thought was very interesting wording as well. Do you have thoughts on the description of the people who are opposing the veneration of Columbus as sinister? How do you feel about that?
There's a part of me that, and I know that this is just me reading into Hitchens, given his contrarian stance, given how he privileges being a contrarian and free thinker, and this intellectualism that surrounds him, I would think that he would have recognized the problems with imperialism, the problems with colonization, but it's the exact opposite. And so, part of the narrative that we've seen, right, with the toppling of statues, it's the same in Canada, with statues of Sir John A. Macdonald and whatnot. This idea that what we are trying to do is erase history. What we are trying to do is to deny the greatness of imperialism, deny the greatness of America, deny the greatness of Canada, and that this is such an insidious thing. And I think it is just, it's just something that is part of this larger culture war, which we often kind of associate with our modern era, but is something that was absolutely at the forefront in the 1990s, right? Specifically around Columbus Day and around Indigenous issues and Native American issues in the U.S. I don't see this as being something very different than the type of language that's used today, on the far right and among within some conservative circles. I sometimes wonder if Hitchens was alive today, where he would be with respect to issues around trans people, with issues around, any of the kind of culture war issues that are at the forefront right now.
Yeah. I think about that too. I made a note here when I was reading his essay, and I wrote down, I would be open to someone like Hitchens changing their mind on this as more was revealed about history. I wonder if he would be this staunch today. And then I wrote probably with a question mark. So I feel as if he might defend his stance on this to this day. And that's just my inkling. I don't obviously know that for sure. I mean, he's been deceased now for several years. But I personally find that when people admit to being open to changing their own mind and saying, these are the things that I've recently changed my mind on, I find that to be a personality attribute instead of a drawback. So if somebody's like, I changed my mind on this, and this, I'm like, right on. That's great. Even if it's something that they change their mind to that maybe I don't really see eye to eye on, somebody who is demonstrating that they're capable of changing their mind on something, to me is a good human characteristic. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, this is something that Hitchens and the New Atheists would say about religionists, right? They would celebrate any former conservative evangelical who, quote unquote, sees the light and renounces their former ways. But, Hitchens was a huge supporter of the war in Iraq, and later in his life kind of, stepped back from that a little bit, but never really apologized, never really admitted fault. And, I'm kind of taking a look at the quote or what you were talking about in terms of him calling the anti-Columbus movement sinister. And it's, he writes, I can never quite decide whether the anti-Columbus movement is merely risible or fatally sinister. It is sinister, though, because it is an ignorant celebration of stasis and backwardness with an unpleasant tinge of self-hatred. There is a vitriol to that. There is a sense of righteousness to that I don't know if it really lends itself to the type of self-reflection that we would hope someone would have.
Yeah. The tinge of self-hatred thing is really interesting too, because like whenever you think about like the discussion around like white guilt, collectively feeling ownership over the sins of, past generations. I think that's kind of what he's referring to. Does that make sense? Do you feel like I'm onto something there?
Absolutely. And I mean, where have we seen this language recently, right? With Black Lives Matter and the whole CRT debate, this is such a long-standing narrative and rhetoric coming from this group. And so, yeah, no, I read it that way as well.
Yeah. And the whole like notion of whenever you acknowledge problems in society today, there's like a movement of people right now that are saying, we are in by far the best point of human history that has ever been, a time to exist. This is the best life has ever been on this planet. And so I'm like, okay, but we still need to talk about how we can be even better, even if you concede that like things are generally pretty good, but things have gotten really weird the last couple of years. I would have been a lot more inclined to agree with that statement in 2019 than I am in 2023. But there's a lot there. It's just such a complicated and endless conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easy to make that argument sitting in 2023 as two white dudes, right? Things are better, right? And in many ways, objectively, there are things that have improved in our society. But we're sitting in a privileged place. Hitchens was certainly sitting in a privileged place, right? And making these sorts of arguments from a position of privilege. And an unreflexive argument. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think about, I live in New York, and I have a daughter who's 9. And I think about the way that certain parts of the United States have changed, because I'm from Missouri, but I live in New York. My daughter was born in Missouri and now lives in New York. So how her life would be different growing up in Missouri versus growing up in New York as a solidly middle-class white girl. How would her life be different living in two different places that have gone in drastically different directions? And I'm not saying New York is perfect by any means, but I am saying that her life as a human female will be different in New York than in Missouri. So it's really incredible. This piece, the Hitchens piece, I don't know if he ever put it in one of his collections or in one of his books. I've only ever been able to find it at brianjohnspencer.blogspot.com. And so I have no idea how Chris would have even found this thing. I haven't listened to his Comply Resist Patreon episode in a long time. But this is not an easy article to dig up, it seems like now.
I wonder why, right? I mean, it's one thing, like, I don't know. I can see how Hitchens could justify his stance on the war in Iraq, and would maybe include essays on that in some of his collected works. But I mean, this is a very problematic piece, and it would not surprise me. This does not surprise me that publishers might not want to include it in an anthology, and maybe he would not have wanted to include it in an anthology. Yeah, that is, when I was searching for it, I had a hard time as well, and I found it exactly on that website.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so looking back at your piece now, what are you like proud of about your piece, and what would you maybe change if you had a little bit more time to play with it?
So when you contacted me for this interview, I have to admit I had a moment of panic because it had been a long time since I had read the piece that I wrote, and I thought, like, shit, did I defend Hitchens in this article? Like, is this one of those things where I came to the other side, and said, like, well, people make mistakes and we should forgive them. So I reread it, and that worry went away. Though I do think I could have taken a stronger stance. I don't think that I necessarily sat on the fence, but I think there are ways that I could have made it clear that maybe there is something to be said about abandoning our idols when we find out that they hold such problematic beliefs. And to be fair, I wrote this in 2017. I wrote this in 4 days. As you note, I'm kind of proud of the way I wrote it. I think that it comes off fairly well, and reflects a lot of the ways in which I was starting to think about some of these issues. In the years since 2017, I've finished my PhD. I'm now finishing my second year of full-time teaching, and I try my best in my courses. If it's my class on cults, if it's my class on culture and religion, or health and healing, I try to center Indigenous issues and Indigenous culture as much as possible. And I recognize now the violence in Hitchens' writing in a way that I don't think is articulated in this piece. Hitchens' article, it comes 2 years after the Oka crisis in Canada, and it's in the midst of Native American resistance to Columbus Day. And by writing this opinion piece, Hitchens contributed to our kind of stock cultural knowledge around Indigenous issues, and did so for the worse. And 1992 was the quincentennial of Columbus's arrival in the quote unquote New World, and I didn't realize this when I was writing the article in 2017. My article itself was kind of a reactionary article, and something I really felt like I just needed to get out there. Hitchens' article is problematic for many reasons, but given the context of it as part of this larger culture war between, the sense of American exceptionalism and greatness, and then the legacy of and continued genocide against Native Americans, against Indigenous peoples in Canada, it adds a weight to it that I would put front and center were I writing this now in a way that I didn't necessarily in the article.
Yeah, and the timing of it too, 1992, 1492, I didn't even think about that. So that's brand new to me right now, and like a real-time revelation of being the 500-year anniversary. Yeah, wow, the timing, that adds another new dimension to the context of Hitchens' piece.
It is, yeah. And so, it is purposeful, right? And when I wrote this in 2017, I kind of just saw it as, sometimes people write opinion pieces about things that are obviously timely, but not necessarily in public consciousness, not something that everyone is necessarily aware of. But yeah, realizing now that this was written 500 years later, and that this is occurring in the midst of this larger debate in America around Columbus Day, and around the treatment of Indigenous peoples, of Native Americans, yeah, it is a problem. It is not great.
Everybody out there listening has an example or 10 or 20 of people whose work were important to them at a period of time, and then they either grew away from it or they felt ostracized by a direction that person went. What are your thoughts on appreciating or thinking about people that mattered to like your intellectual journey, but who you grow away from? Like, how do we deal with that inside ourselves about like do we cherry pick things that are the good and discard the not good? How do you make sense of that, of reconciling like this person mattered to me, I've grown away from them? Is there still like value in honoring that past times when you felt a little more unified with what they were doing?
I mean, I think there is. I mean, I think it's an open question, but I do think there is, right? It was very formative. Hitchens was formative for me in so many ways. And, as I said earlier, the new atheist movement is what motivated me to, take courses in religious studies and is part of this trajectory that has brought me to where I am. And, I wrote this piece in the shadow of the Me Too movement, and in a moment where I was kind of thinking about my own relationship to people and ideas that were problematic. And I think that there is an argument to be made for, maybe the value of separating art from the artist. Although I think that there's also a good argument to be made against that. And I don't really know. To be honest, I don't have a good answer. And I also know that a lot of my feelings towards this come from maybe an unreflexive place. This is maybe not a comparable example, but, I do not like Mel Gibson. I do not like Mel Gibson's ideas. I do like some of the films that Mel Gibson has made, but given, his history of anti-Semitism, I will never pay for a Mel Gibson movie. I'll never go see one in theaters. I'll never watch it through a streaming service. And Mel Gibson has not held a comparable place in my history and in my mind that Hitchens has.
Right.
But, I feel less problematic, rereading Hitchens' work. And maybe that is because, this piece that he wrote in 1992, it is a conversation that I'm not a part of. It is about a community that is not my own, and so I don't know. This is where I think, there is this maybe unreflexive part of me that I need to think about and I need to take into consideration. I don't have a clear answer either.
No, that makes sense to me too, because honestly, if this piece didn't exist, this song wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be having this wonderful conversation. So, I mean, we're bonding in a conversation because of the fact that this essay was originally written. Okay, so Comply Resist the Song by Propagandhi, one of Chris's favorites that they've ever done. He loves this song. Jord told me when I interviewed him that this is one of the hardest songs for him to get through in a live setting. He said it's very hard. And he said when it's at the end of a set, he is very disappointed. And when I saw Propagandhi in Winnipeg a couple of Octobers ago, they ended night 3. They did 3 nights in a row, and night 3's closer was Comply Resist. And Jord was like making comments in his microphone about how like, all right, everybody, show's over. And it was so funny because had Jord not told me that in an interview that he found the song really hard, and then thinking about him doing 3 shows in a row after not playing shows for 2 years, I was like laughing so hard that they made Jord play this last on the last night of their 3-night stand. So that was a really funny little connection with this. But how does Comply Resist stack up for you in the discography of Propagandhi's music?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing I'll say as well is, I like the story that you just told, and I think I mean, poor Jord, but
Yeah.
I do think that it speaks to something that's really important in this conversation, especially for people like us, which is to kind of sit in the discomfort, right? Sit in the discomfort that the writing of someone that we admired, once admired, creates in us. Sit in the discomfort, because that is that is, I think, a really important thing for us to be able to do.
And his words cause pain to people who read it, where he is like, lording over them essentially. So these words do cause pain to people who read them.
Exactly. And yeah, so anyways, I just wanted to say that, but where it stacks up, it is one of my favorite songs on the album. And yeah, I wonder where it sits. I'm not actually really sure, to be honest with you. Maybe not one of my favorites, not because of the content of it, but definitely I'd say top two in Victory Lap. That's for sure.
Nice. What's your what's the other one in the top two? You don't have to tell me which one's number one. You don't have to pick.
I'm just embarrassed because I forget the name of the song, but the last song on the album,
Zucosis, yeah.
Zucosis, yeah. It's hard to beat that song. It is so powerful. You and I were actually at the same Propaganda show in Guelph.
Were we?
We were. We have a mutual friend, or I have a friend who you're friends with his brother. In any case, him and I were talking during the show, and we were saying that, since Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, Propaganda has done this thing where the first song on every album is the hardest, most impactful song. And yeah, I feel that is very, very true. I mean, even with Victory Lap, although yeah, Zucosis is, I think, probably my favorite on the album. What
did you think about that show in Guelph?
It was excellent. It was one of the first concerts I went to, kind of, post COVID.
Yeah.
It was a little weird to see no one wearing masks. But it was excellent. It was the first time I'd see them with their new lineup, and I love this band. They mean so much to me. Their music is incredible. Their politics is incredible. Their presence on stage is incredible. Like, there's very little to fault them on.
Amazing. Well, I couldn't believe that they played Apparently I'm a PC Fascist at that show in Guelph. Shocking. Completely shocked. Blew me away. Sue Lynn told me before the show and was like, yeah, we got a surprise for everybody tonight. And I was like, oh man. And that was the only show that they played that song. So I think that they practiced it during sound check or something and busted that out. So amazing. that was a unique little surprise for that little run of shows there was PC Fascist. So you got to see a special one. That was the only show they played it.
I did not know that. That is wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy, we'll have to hang out again for the Religion podcast. I'm super excited that you were willing to come on and chat with me about Christopher Hitchens and his role in your intellectual journey, your story with Propaganda, and their role in your intellectual journey as well. And then seeing how these two plot lines collide in Comply Resist. Really wonderful. So I'm glad that these things in your life that have meant a lot to you at various points have collided in this song that led you to write Christopher Hitchens, An Ode to False Idols, that is available for everybody to read. I will post a link to it. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a real pleasure.
No, thank you. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to think about this piece and think about its history. And, I think, this podcast is wonderful. And I'm very grateful to you for inviting me.
All right. Thank you so much to Aukai Ligairi, Dr. Anthony Siracusa, and Dr. Jeremy Cohen for all of their wonderful contributions to this episode, both musically and conversationally. And just one more reminder that Aukai Ligairi's conversation on episode 92 recently was a Comply Resist standalone part 1, and that conversation is absolutely wonderful. So if you are looking for more conversations about Comply Resist, go find that one. So Steve, let's talk about some of this music in this tune. What do you think?
First of all, I just want to talk about my hot take.
I bring it, lay it on me.
My hot take is that I think this song could be the album closer.
Ooh. Okay, talk about some sequencing here. Like, what are you envisioning?
This song gives me very similar vibes to Purina Hall of Fame. And in my mind, Purina Hall of Fame, it doesn't get better as an album closer than that.
Mm-hmm.
Because this song gives me similar vibes when you listen to it, like the verses are they're very similar in how they're very like forward driving, and how like the intro of this song happens. I just feel like this would be an absolute killer album closer. That being said, they're giving it to us as track 2. I mean, yeah, let's front load the bangers.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really special tune. As far as I can tell, the band plays this song at every show for, the last 5 or 6 years. So I think that as far as their own sentiment about it, I think that they think this is one of their definitive pieces for them as a band as well,
I would agree with that. It's an absolute killer song.
Yeah. So I got a little bit of logistics here. This song is 3 minutes and 22 seconds in length. The music ends at about 3 minutes and 17 seconds, and then it rings out. And then we've got a really interesting and unique beginning to this song. And I really want to hear your thoughts on this because for the first 27 seconds, it's just Chris, right? The drums come in a little bit at 27 seconds with the lyric, I'll paraphrase. And then I see like a sort of a transition here with, where it says the silly talk of resurgence, the lyric, as it begins to feel more like a full band effort there with like Jord coming in with a more of a beat, right, to back up Chris with under that silly talk of resurgence. And the first portion of the song ends at 121, just before Chris sings this boundless epoch lyric that is not backed up by any instruments, just Chris as a standalone vocal. In the first minute and 20 almost kind of reminds me that it could fit on a record like alongside a tune like Cut Into the Earth, where the time signatures are wild, the music is very clean and clear. There's not a lot of aggression behind it. And, I think I said that like on Cut Into the Earth that I could see these guys playing this style of stuff more as full standalone pieces in their later years. If they're ever like, we're 75, we want to cut out the speed. I could see them doing this kind of stuff if they were playing music, 20 years from now, is like these elaborate, slowed down, very experimental, longer pieces. So this first minute and 20 of Comply Resist is really super unique for this band. And I'm just wondering if you can help me break down this first minute and 20 or so.
So the part that's just Chris at the beginning, it's like you said, very unique, but it's got such an element of like importance and grandeur. Like, that like when he intros the song like that, that it's going to get real. It's just setting up the story for everything that comes after it. And it's such a great way to set up the context of the rest of the song. Then when George's drums come in at 27, his drums sound unbelievable on this song.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they sound huge.
Yeah.
And that only adds to the grandeur of this intro. Right. So I think, up until the 121, and then at 123, that's when that main verse riff kicks in, which is absolute killer.
Oh yeah.
Killer part.
Yeah. Like I said in the very beginning of this episode, my ears, my stupid, immature musical brain really latched onto the palming, but honestly, that riff that Chris is doing under the verses, where he's got this like little march feeling, it's like with like his pointer finger and his middle finger, he's got something going on where he's like alternating on the strings. And I had never seen anything like that. Like I had to watch like the playthrough videos and really pay attention to them, watching them play this song live. But there is something about that riff that he's playing under those verses that is so much more impressive than just that really fast palm muting part,
Oh, it absolutely shreds that part. Like you hear that and you're just like, yes. I love it. It's, to me, that's the part musically that I love most in this song. That verse guitar part is unbelievable.
Yeah. Did you try to play it at all? Like, does that make sense? Like what I was saying about like how like the pointer and the middle finger just kind of like going back and forth. Like because I had really never seen anything like that before.
I watched the video that you had sent me, but I haven't had a chance to pick it up and noodle around with it on the guitar. I've been focused on a lot of other guitar stuff recently, but yeah, let's be real here. I'm going to try and rip it off.
Nice. Dude, I totally overlooked that part for years and years in favor of that audibly very clear, super fast palm muter part of innovation, that part. But to me, like the riff with the alternating pointer and middle finger is far cooler than just the super fast palm muter part that sounds awesome. But like when you really break down the technical aspect of it, which one is a lot more amazing? And to me, it's the one that is so cool that's hiding in plain sight under the singing that I had really never heard about. And, I can't talk about music as well as some people that really know the guitar. So I reached out to Tim from Protest the Hero. And I was like, Tim, what do you think about the guitar performance on Comply Resist? And Tim shot me back a brief message, and he watched that playthrough video that I sent you where Chris is playing this on an acoustic guitar. And first of all, we were both laughing that acoustic guitar is just so... It's just such an odd looking acoustic guitar that I've never seen that kind of acoustic guitar before. It looks like a Spanish guitar on like the headstock and the tuning pegs. But it's just such an interesting guitar. But Tim said, I like the voicings used on the high chords at the beginning, just slight variations on the same chord. I also did not think the fast part was played like he is doing it. Definitely looks easier than what I expected, but all in all, unique composition and all the riffs tie together nicely. So Tim was like thinking it was going to be harder looking than what he wound up actually seeing in the video. So just kind of goes to show Chris's genius in that regard, that it sounds super hard, but Tim was like, whoa, it might be a little easier to play than I was anticipating. So that's kind of cool as well to hear like the way that Tim's guitar brain works with regards to breaking down the guitar in this song.
Special shout out to Tim for being an awesome dude. I think it was close to 18 years ago when my old band were going out on a weekend tour. I remember going to Tim's house to pick up the Protest the Hero van because they lent us their van for the weekend. And Tim saying, you guys hit the oil change limit. You guys got to get an oil change while you're on the road.
Nice. That's hilarious. And, that's a fair deal for Tim for doing some preventive maintenance on their vehicle.
Absolutely. Tim's awesome dude.
Fun fact, I'm seeing Protest the Hero in St. Catharines, Ontario in 1 week. So I'm very excited for that. So by the time this comes out, I will have seen Protest the Hero very recently with their new drummer, HK, who I believe is in a band called Intervals in Ontario, and also works at Sheet Happens Publishing. So I'm excited to see the revamped Protest the Hero lineup next week.
That is awesome.
Yeah, man, I'm excited. So it's always great to hear from the Protest the Hero camp about their love of propaganda as well. Rhodey was recently here. Tim is back on our status update episode, and Tim also contributed a piano cover of Dear Coach's Corner for episode 50. So they've been with me for a long time on this podcast. I'm really delighted by that band. So as far as some other stuff on the guitar goes, we've got a tuned guitar to E flat, and then the low E is dropped a full step beyond that. What does this mean?
That we're getting into. I'm not very good at music theory or any of that kind of stuff. Like, my guitar is tuned to B. Like, in no way am I qualified to be able to be talking about this. I just tune down to B and just go chugga 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 chugga.
I love that. When I was listening to Chris's Patreon show about this song, some comments stumbled. Some comments stuck out to me. I believe he said he stumbled upon these guitar licks while making duplicate keys a caro. So Comply Resist guitars have a long history dating back to around 2009, 2010, I think that he said. And if you listen to some parts of Comply Resist and then listen to duplicate keys immediately, it's not very far-fetched. Where Chris comes up with a dun 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 dun. So there's some parts that connect with from duplicate keys over to Comply Resist a little bit. So that was kind of cool. Chris also says that he plays all of the guitars in the studio and that this song is only him on guitar. There's no Suitland on this song. There's no Beeve on this song. And speaking of Beeve, when Chris sent Beeve the demo of this song during the songwriting process, Beeve had no comments or suggestions for how to improve this song. He said this one was perfect as is. So Beeve affirmed Chris's that Chris had totally nailed it on this one. And let's see. So Chris discusses the tunings, and the chorus guitars are really cool. The way they play against each other. So there's parts where there's like a rhythm guitar going bam, 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 these like big open strums while the chorus singing is happening. So sometimes like Chris is doing one thing and Suitland is doing another, and then they kind of flip-flop some points throughout the song. So a very keen ear will notice that there are a lot of variations going on throughout this tune on guitar. So it's pretty cool.
I love a good dueling guitar callback and then switch parts. It's very much like an old Iron Maiden tactic. And I think more bands should do stuff like that because it's really cool when they do it.
Yeah. Todd's got some cool stuff too on this one. He's doing like during the verses guitar part where it's going like Todd's going completely nuts on this one as well. And then he's got an awesome little fill that he does under the lyric "Make a Difference." So if anybody's looking to hone in on Todd, he's got a nice little flair that he throws in under the lyric "Make a Difference" in this tune. So go and find that particular little Todd bass run as well, because those kinds of little Todd fills are all over this record, and that's a really good one on this tune.
In my opinion, I think this is one of Todd's best songs.
Awesome.
Like, Todd is ripping on this one.
Yeah. I mean, what else? Tell me.
Oh, it just, like we talked about. I mean, obviously, this is far later in their catalog than the first ones we talked about, but like the bass is so much more prominent on this record, and I feel like you can hear it a lot better. And just hearing Todd's runs and his lines in this song, they just really add to the urgency and the pace of the song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Well, and just to remind folks out there, if you want to hear about the recording process of Victory Lap, you can find our Negretto episode where I interviewed JP Peters, who engineered Failed States and Victory Lap, about what it's like to be in the studio with later era Propagandy. Not like 90s Propagandy or whatever, but like 2010 and beyond Propagandy. So JP's storytelling about the recording of this record is awesome on that Negretto episode. So I just want to remind people that is a really great conversation way back in the catalog that speaks to what Steve's talking about here.
But between you and me, the only Propagandy that we want to be in the studio with is the Chris's Mom's Attic for the Venom cover recording.
Dude, amazing. Seriously, I love our Venom episode so much. When I was listening back to that before we put it out, I was like, this is complete craziness. And it's just so in the spirit of the chaos and the messiness that is Venom, that I felt like we actually tonally captured what was going on for that episode. So I love that one. It's a fun one for me.
It was absolutely a riot to do.
You mentioned earlier that Jord is completely amazing on this song. The first minute and change of Jord's drumming on this tune shows just that Jord is not a normal punk rock drummer, right? Shows tremendous versatility, and Jord's got a lot of stuff on this one that I like. And obviously this is such a powerful performance. And I thought back about when I interviewed Jord a while back for the Fucking Rich, Fuck the Poor episode that I did with him. And I was asking him about like, what are some of your hardest tunes? And he said that Comply Resist is one of the hardest songs that they play live for him. And that whenever it comes up on the set list, he kind of has to like take a massive deep breath and like steel himself for what is about to happen. And then when I saw them in Winnipeg for their first 3 shows back after the pandemic break, they closed with Comply Resist on night 3, and Jord was on the microphone at Park Theater in Winnipeg kind of complaining. He's like, no, there's no more songs. And Chris is like, yep, we got one more. And Jord was back there going like, oh God. So I could actually tell that Jord was kind of exasperated that after 3 shows in a row, after not playing shows for like over 2 years, that they chose to close with this song on the end of night 3. And obviously he crushed it and it was all good, but this song for Jord is a really special one. I love his snare emphasis on Chris's syllables of paradise, where he's like, ba, 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 Eden. I love his cymbal hits under innovation and opportunity, because it just shows when Jord emphasizes the vocals with the way that he plays his drums. To me, it just shows Chris and Jord's 35-year friendship. You know what I mean? It just shows their lifetime of playing music together. The way that Jord complements Chris's singing so much on this particular song it's just like, you got to be, I feel like you almost have to be friends and partners for a long time to nail the way that the drums speak to the singing on a song like this.
The drums and the vocals have such a complementary relationship that each one of them helps accentuate the other. It's really well done.
Yeah, when they're in the writing space, I just pictured Jord being like, "Hey, Jord, that was a pretty good one there," and Jord's like, "Yeah, that was a good one. I like that too." And I almost feel like they just kind of realize when they've tapped into the other one, and it's just amazing thinking about the lifetime of friendship these two guys have, and how they're really just like the heart and soul of this band, because they just have it on full display here. The way that Jord's drums speak to Chris's singing, just incredible. He's also got an amazing fill after Settlements Put to the Torch, where he does like this massive rack tom fill that just feels like it goes on forever. And it just feels like there's like 10 rack toms in a row that he's just going all the way down. And I'm just like, oh my God, Jord, I love you so much, man. This is great.
That fill sounds huge.
It's great. It's a perfect fill for that spot. And thinking back on the interview I did with Anthony Siracusa, everybody heard Anthony's cover that he did it was just instrumental, but he pointed out an interesting approach that Jord takes on the kick pedal is it's not like what a lot of like 90s Fat Records bands do, where there's like a lot of rebound on the kick and they're going boop bop boop bop boop bop boop bop. It's not that. It's more of a, once again, doing a less active kick pedal on this song in the fast parts. And it's so cool because it's more of a single kick instead of a rebounded kick approach that a lot of like 90s style bands do. And it kind of reminds me of like what thrash bands do. Like, when there's like a thrash band, they kind of just do like a single kick pedal and then they accentuate it with like a bunch of really fast, like double kick fills. Jord does that on this song where he's just got like this single kick going on the really fast parts. He doesn't do the no effects or the no use for name style. It's just more of a single approach. So it's almost like a less is more, but very inspired by thrash bands.
It's that you keep it less active so that when you do activate it, it becomes special.
Dude, it's really interesting to think about how much I loved the really fast kick pedal. Like everybody can think about like Operation Phoenix by Good Riddance or Making Friends by No Use for Name. There's a very accentuated kick pedal where you can hear every single kick beat. They're way up high in the mix and they're really prominent. And it sounds super cool, but this is just something that's really controlled and restrained. And like you said, when you do bring out the fills, it just accentuates it more because the beat serves the song the way that Jord does it with the single kick. Instead of trying to show off all of the time, it's just got these huge fills that really accentuate certain moments instead of making you pay attention to the kick drum throughout the rest of the song.
Do you think that's a result of like the Ryan Green era production versus the post Ryan Green era?
Absolutely. And Ryan Green was like, it's a very prominent sound with that kick pedal. And I was really glad that Anthony pointed out that the way that Jord handles the kick drum on this song is not like those songs that I was just talking about. So I just love that the way that Jord is very inspired almost by thrash and by doing less on the kick drum. When you bring out the big guns on those other fills, it really stands out.
The moral of the story here is everything would be better if it were just inspired by thrash.
Amazing. I love it. And then, so then we have this last part of the song for Jord. Everything from Don't Comply at 2 minutes and 9 seconds to You Die at 2:39 is some of the finest Jord playing on any record in Propaganda's entire catalog. There's no phoning it in. There's no wimping out. It's full commitment and guts by Jord to commit these parts to the permanent version of the song in the studio, because then he has to hold himself accountable for pulling this off live year after year. He could have played that 30 seconds in a lot of different ways, a lot more simply, and made his life easier live. But that 30 seconds between 2:09 and 2:39 is seriously some of my favorite Jord drumming ever. And the fact that he did that, knowing he has to pull it off live with how much Chris loves this song, it's super impressive that Jord really committed to it.
I think it's a testament for just the band overall not willing to cut corners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I got a few vocal delivery notes. Was the part where Chris sings "The Boundless Epoch we bestowed," was that one of did you have like a misheard lyrics feeling for that part? Because I did. Whenever the record came out, I got lazy and I didn't like read what he was saying for a couple of weeks when the record came out, but I just had no idea what he was saying right there, even though it was completely a cappella with no musical accompaniment.
I actually try, maybe this is because I'm old, but I actually try when I'm listening to a record for the first time, I try and actually listen with the lyrics.
Like the first listen through?
Yeah, I try and have that experience because it reminds me of when I was a kid buying like cassettes or records or whatever, bringing them home and that first listen, like reading the liner notes. And so I try and at least give myself that a similar experience to not, while music is so readily available, like in the digital world, I
Yeah.
still try and give myself that familiar experience with my music listening.
Well, this Boundless Epoch we bestowed was one of my, I'll admit that I was lazy when this record first came out because I was, a failed states supporting cast fanboy through and through. And I didn't read those, but now I just look back on that and chuckle. But there's also something that I heard in this song when I was listening to it over and over for this episode that I had never heard before. There is a great after history and before has been made. So it's history has been made. And that is so random and so freaking cool that he split up a standalone thought with an and I don't know why I had never really understood that was happening there. But that was a nice little realization that I had the other day. I was like, whoa, that's a really cool between history and has been made, because he splits up a standalone thought with his and I just really dug it.
It just makes it sound so much tougher. It
really does. It's really cool. So on Chris's Patreon, he talks and includes a sample of a jam space recording where they were trying to have like a keyboard in the intro, just in the solo Chris guitar section. There was like this keyboard thing that they were trying to do in an early version of this song. That got vetoed later when they were recording it. I think Chris was feeling self-conscious about being out front just by himself with guitar for so long in the song, because this is a pretty unique one. But in the original version of the song, they were trying out some keyboard backing underneath Chris's first 30 seconds or so. And I thought that was pretty cool to hear on Chris's Patreon, but people can go and find that. He recorded a Jam Space demo recording of this. So if you want to hear that, go to Chris's Patreon and check it out.
I would love to hear this re-recorded with the keyboards from 1984.
Yeah, nice.
I think it would just be so funny.
Well, and this is what's so cool about Chris's Patreon too, because he has another clip that he includes in his Comply Resist episode where it shows an explosion that JP Peters was wanting to put in after You Die. So it was basically like, you die, boom. And there was this explosion that they put into a version of the song, and that also got vetoed. But there's like, JP likes explosions. So there's, that in Duplicate Keys, Akaro. But there's a version of a clip on Chris's Patreon too, where he puts that explosion version in. So those are some of my thoughts on the music. This is a absolutely incredible song.
You put the explosion in the album, you got to have pyro live. That's the way it goes.
Yeah. Amazing. Going to like clubs in like Park Theater in Winnipeg or London Music Hall in London, Ontario, seeing pyro. Ooh, man, that Guelph Music Hall though that I went to last spring and saw them play there, that was the huge ceiling in that room. They actually had some space for some pyro in there.
I felt like they could have tossed in some. I mean, it's definitely illegal in a building that small, I've got to imagine, but
love it. Steve, do you have any other thoughts on music, or should we chat about some of the words in this tune?
We covered most of it. Let's go straight into the words.
All right. So first of all, just a personal question. Do you have any history with Christopher Hitchens in your reading life?
I actually do not.
Okay.
So this was my first foray into that.
Okay, cool. I got, just as I said this in the interviews, but I read God is Not Great. I believe the subtitle is How Religion Poisons Everything or something like that. I read that several times when I was an undergrad trying to make sense of, my own lack of religious and conviction and spirituality, and it just is a book that spoke to me at a particular time and place in my life. So I read that book a couple times, and I also watched a ton of like Christopher Hitchens debates on YouTube, mostly when I was an undergrad in college. But I was looking around my bookshelves the other day, and there are still a couple of Christopher Hitchens books on my shelf in my house here. So I do have some connection and some past experiences with reading Hitchens's work. But we've got this opening lyric. Circa 1992, Hitchens faxed his copy through as regards Columbus Day. So first of all, fax machines are still a thing. I use them at work once in a while, and I cannot stand them. So I am still using fax machines in 2023 when it is explicitly referred to as a 1992 technology in the song. So that's pretty crazy. Do you use fax machines at all still?
I haven't used a fax machine in so long.
You're so lucky.
I mean, just the idea of sending something to someone that literally anyone could just walk by and pick it up. Like there's no, like the amount of sensitive stuff that gets sent in faxes, and that they literally just go to a room where anyone could pick up and walk off. Like,
it's insane.
I don't understand how, because we have pretty strict like data privacy laws here in Canada. And I'm like, a fax machine, like based on the way that we have to keep all like online data secure and everything like that, I got to imagine a fax machine violates literally every data policy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I may have to take a stand at work about fax machines. So another question, is there any sort of Columbus Day thing in Canada? Does Christopher Columbus have any kind of celebratory aspect in Canada's like national calendar of holidays or anything like that?
So this is interesting. So in 2014, I was living in San Diego, and I was super into disc golf back then. So I show up to Morley Field, the local disc golf course, and I go to play, and they're like, "Oh, it's a holiday today. It's extra fee." And I'm like, "What holiday is it?" He's like, "Columbus Day." And I'm like, "Is that a real holiday?" Because Columbus Day falls at the same time as Canadian Thanksgiving. So while you guys celebrate Columbus Day, or don't celebrate Columbus Day down there, whatever you guys want to do with it, we are having Thanksgiving up here.
Interesting. Yeah, it was really cool being in Canada, in Winnipeg, for the Canadian Thanksgiving weekend a couple of years ago in 2021 for those propaganda shows. I was very thankful that year during Canadian Thanksgiving that I was rocking out 3 nights in a row at the Park Theater. So the change in tone around Columbus Day has shifted quite a lot in my memory of my life. It feels very different now in the US in 2023 than in 1992, maybe a bit, but I think that it probably depends a bit on where you live as well. Some states have begun to abolish Columbus Day. Some states have begun to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day instead of or addition to Columbus Day. So sometimes it'll be the same day. Like it'll pop up on my iCalendar on my desktop computer here, and it'll say both things on my calendar. But in 1988, Hawaii adopted Indigenous Peoples Day. In 1989, South Dakota did. In 2015, Alaska did. And then in 2016, Minnesota and Vermont did. And Vermont stopped celebrating Columbus Day entirely in 2019 in favor of only Indigenous Peoples Day. In 2018, Iowa and North Carolina implemented it. In 2019, California, DC, Louisiana, Maine, Michigan, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Wisconsin added Indigenous Peoples Day. And New Mexico, Maine, and DC celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day instead of Columbus Day now. So those are places that abolished Columbus Day celebrations entirely. In 2020, Nebraska and Virginia added Indigenous Peoples Day. And in 2021, Oregon and Texas did. Notably, missing on that list is New York.
I was wondering when you were going to say New York, and it just never happened.
Dude, I am fairly baffled, to be perfectly honest with you. But it also kind of makes sense, I suppose, because one of the one of the largest Columbus Day celebrations in the country is in New York City. There is a Columbus Day parade in New York City every year that draws about 1 million people to the parade. So it's huge. And, I don't know if you ever watched The Sopranos. Did you ever watch that?
I've not watched it, but I've been trying to convince Zoe that we should watch it.
When you do, there is a Columbus Day protest scene in The Sopranos where Paulie and Silvio, characters on The Sopranos, are upset about what they see as people attacking their Italian hero, Christopher Columbus. So there is a Columbus hanging in effigy in a Sopranos episode and about to be burned, and then a scuffle breaks out. And so, that sentiment isn't really all that rare, since apparently New York City has that massive Columbus Day celebration. But is
Paulie or Silvio, is one of those guys Steve Van Zandt?
Yeah, Silvio is Steven Van Zandt from the Bruce Springsteen E Street Band.
And honestly, that's probably why I want to watch The Sopranos most, just to have more Steve Van Zandt time. But
you should. Yeah.
In terms of New York still celebrating Columbus Day,
mm-hmm.
Do you think it's a situation where, like, obviously it's come up do you think it's a situation where one guy was like, "Oh, I thought you canceled it," and the other guy's like, "No, I thought you canceled it," and then everyone just thought it was canceled, but it's still happening because they thought someone else did it?
Oh, absolutely. New York is, it's really funny that when I moved from Missouri, a deep red state, to New York, a blue state, that I thought that I was like moving to some politically paradise sort of place. And it's just hilariously inept in so many ways. So yeah, I would not even doubt it whatsoever if that was actually the case entirely.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would much rather celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day than Columbus Day.
Yeah, I do too. So New York, get with the program. Maybe I'll have to write some letters and ignite my civic activism here. So I found there's so many good articles about Indigenous Peoples Day and Columbus Day online. Reuters does really good coverage of it. And in a 2018 article, I found about Los Angeles, how Los Angeles, the city, has entirely replaced Columbus Day. I found a quote that I really liked. It says, quote, "Critics of Columbus Day, proclaimed a national holiday in the 1930s, say it has perpetuated a false historical narrative surrounding Christopher Columbus, the Italian-born explorer, credited with, quote, discovering America. When the first of his 4 transatlantic voyages for the Spanish crown landed on an inhabited island of the Bahamas in 1492, while Columbus was long hailed for bringing European civilization and settlement to the New World, present-day scholars acknowledge a far more complicated legacy, including enslavement and subjugation of the indigenous inhabitants he encountered." So first of all, I found it fascinating that Columbus Day was founded in the 1930s. So that was, just a little historical tidbit about how it came to be. So a lot of places have replaced Columbus Day. And interestingly, the first celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day, this is something I just discovered. The first celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day was October 11th and 12th, 1992. Circa 1992, Hitchens faxes copy through, right? The first celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day was 1992 in Berkeley, California. So it's possible, that's on the 500-year anniversary of Columbus's landing or whatever in 1492. So Hitchens's timing of the article is entirely about the 500-year anniversary, but it also aligns perfectly with the first celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day. So that was an interesting discovery as well about when Indigenous Peoples Day was first celebrated in the U.S.
That is super interesting. Now in 2023, it seems almost crazy that it took that long.
Yeah.
But we're still sitting here in 2023 where there's still places that do not celebrate that, which is even crazier.
I know. Well, and earlier I know I said that Hawaii adopted it in 1988, and then I just totally contradicted that by saying that the first celebration was in 92. But Hawaii celebrated it as something called Discoverers Day in 1988, and South Dakota, which celebrated in 1989, celebrated it as Native American Day instead of Columbus Day. So there are instances of it being earlier than 92, but as far as Indigenous Peoples Day, as we now know it, it seems that 1992 is the crucial date and that the first real celebration of it was in Berkeley, California in 92.
Maybe you can just help educate me on this here. But so South Dakota was one of the first ones you said, right?
Mm-hmm,
Is that predominantly a red state or a blue state?
I believe it's a red state for sure, but there is such a massive indigenous history of South Dakota. It's such an important state in the history of the United States. So I mean, the tribes of South Dakota are the Cheyenne, the Crow. There's a bunch, and so there are 9 tribes essentially, I think, that are recognized by the state of South Dakota. But everybody's heard about Standing Rock recently with a lot of protests. So I'm fairly certain that Standing Rock is South Dakota as well. So there's just such a massive history of indigenous peoples in South Dakota that I think that's kind of like where it comes from. But politically, I believe it's still red.
Yeah, no doubt. I just assumed that politically it would be stomped out like most other things are by red states.
Yeah, I mean, so we'll see. History is still ongoing, and we never know where it will go next. Unfortunately, not always towards good things. As we all know. But we've got this next lyric, and so now that we got Chris talking, and if you'll permit me the conceit of a posthumous critique. So Christopher Hitchens dies. So this is after the death of Christopher Hitchens. So Christopher Hitchens cannot reply to this song because he's already deceased by the time Comply Resist comes out. I'll paraphrase. My colorful exotic friend, respectable, well-spoken, unlike the rest of them. As you know, I'm colorblind and you're a credit to your kind. So I love Chris's modeling of humility, where he asks for essentially forgiveness for being possibly conceited in his paraphrasing of this deceased thinker and writer. So I like that Chris has a little bit of humility in his lyric, comes through and kind of reflects who he is as a person, where it seems like he's always, trying to wrap his brain around as many perspectives as he can in order to fully come to see how he actually thinks about an issue. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. It's just that, that curious mind that wants to be informed with as many perspectives as possible so you can best articulate your, stance on things.
Yeah. And the colorful exotic friend lyric was a little confusing to me. I'm not entirely sure who Chris is referring to there. The opening lines of the Hitchens piece refers to a man named David Dellinger, who, as far as I can tell, is white, but is a pacifism activist who died in 2004 and who was on trial as one of the Chicago 7 in 1969. So there's a little bit of a gap here for me about who the colorful exotic friend is that Chris is referring to. I'm not sure if it's like just a creative play about the way that Hitchens is talking about indigenous people in general. On the original essay, I can't quite tell. But then, he goes on to these next lines. Tell me, where is your gratitude for all we've done for you, this paradise, Eden Empire, kingdom? So Hitchens' main critique of Columbus Day protests, he lays it out in the original essay. So Hitchens writes those who view the history of North America as a narrative of genocide and slavery are, it seems to me, hopelessly stuck on this reactionary position. They can think of the Western expansion of the United States only in terms of plague blankets, bootleg booze, and dead buffalo, never in terms of the medicine chest, the wheel, and the railway. So Christopher Hitchens is saying that people who are protesting against Columbus Day are focused only on the bad within society and are just like failing to see good stuff that came out of society, just purely for the sake of what Hitchens sees as harping on bad stuff that people living today can do absolutely nothing about. So I think that's what Hitchens is getting at here. So Hitchens is like, cheer up. Yes, terrible stuff happens, but terrible stuff is definitely going to happen by people, against people. And in the grand scheme of history, he's saying that the society is better now than it would have been. But how in the world can he know that? Do you know what I'm saying? Imagine mass migration to North America never happened, right? Imagine that the people, Steve, who kind of look like me, never arrived in North America and instead just remained on the European continent. So it's completely ridiculous and impossible to suggest we can know what societies would or would not have become had colonial mass migration movements to North America not occurred. So Hitchens is being like, look at all the good. And he's saying that this society was backwards and hopeless, and look at what we've made it. But we have no way of knowing what it would have become had we never arrived. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think when he wrote this, I think absolutely. I think now we probably have enough data and information to put together of what type of simulation it would have looked like. But you know, his blanket statement here, absolutely no. I'm calling that out.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on these on this particular lyric with, and you'll permit me the conceit, through the Eden Empire and Kingdom section?
No, we can move on to the next one. We spent enough time on that one.
Sounds good. Well then, so that takes us through Chris's opening section of the song, where it's the quieter section of the song, the first minute 20. That's everything that we have up to there for singing, right? And then he dives into this boundless epoch we've bestowed upon your savage, empty lands. Well, of course, mistakes were made, but as far as human progress goes, welcome to a slightly higher plane of innovation and opportunity for your trampled communities. So I found the passage from the Hitchens piece that I think this is based on. So Hitchens writes, as Marx wrote about India, the impact of a more developed society upon a culture, or a series of warring cultures, since there was no such nation as India before the British Empire, can spread aspects of modernity and enlightenment that outlive and transcend the conqueror. This isn't always true. The British probably left Africa worse off than they found it, and they certainly retarded the whole life of Ireland. But it is sometimes unambiguously the case that a certain coincidence of ideas, technologies, population movements, and politico-military victories leaves humanity on a slightly higher plane than it knew before. The transformation of the part of the northern part of the continent into America inaugurated a nearly boundless epoch of innovation and opportunity, and thus deserves to be celebrated with great vim and gusto, with or without the participation of those who wish they had never been born. I find it really fascinating that he says that anybody who would dare critique history or the ways that we venerate people in the past who did atrocities, he's like, if you critique these people who were alive long ago that did these terrible things, you clearly wish you had never been born, since your entire purpose of life is just to talk shit all the time. So I found that to be a very, unfortunate line. Like, I have plenty of, great friends and me who we have deep, serious, meaningful critiques about the way society is, but it doesn't mean I wish I wasn't here, you know?
Yeah, it's a tough call. Like, when he's talking about, yeah, a whole bunch of bad stuff happened, but yeah, a whole bunch of good stuff happened. But at the end of the day, even in every one of those situations, when you break up, like compartmentalize all the good stuff that's come, there's a whole bunch of bad stuff that happened in those specific situations too. Like, but to shut out all of the bad stuff and only accept the good stuff, it seems really naive, and to just kind of forcing yourself to live in a world with rose-colored glasses. Like,
totally. And think about how segregated our societies are to this day, right? If you never meaningfully and honestly address all of the tragic history behind it, then like camps of human beings will continue to be fragmented into segregated places because they'll feel like there's no way they can reconcile. So like, I feel like not acknowledging the bad only contributes to and exacerbates segregation in society to this day. Like I see like racial segregation in cities across this continent as a direct result of not dealing with horrible things. That's kind of the way that I see it. I'm just like, why are people so segregated? And to me, the answer is history and unaccounted for atrocity. That's kind of how I see it.
It's interesting because I guess from my slightly different perspective here, but like traveling in the US, I'd never really experienced like truly segregated areas until I was traveling in two places that come to mind are when I was in Louisiana, and the other one was when I was in Dayton, Ohio. And both they're completely different, but so similar in so many ways, and how the areas are just so segregated. It's awful.
Oh yeah, like a mile and a half from my house here in Buffalo is like it's like apartheid, right? It's not that much of a stretch to feel like you go from one apartheid society to another when you ride your bike through a city and you step over the color line of where societies are divided. Here in Buffalo, I can draw a circle around it. It's to the east of Main Street in Buffalo, and it's to like the south of Kensington Avenue in Buffalo. And on the far east side of it, it would probably be like Harlem Road. So I can visualize exactly where the apartheid system is in place here in Buffalo, where I live. And in St. Louis, I can picture it as well, where I grew up, because there's a street in St. Louis called Del Mar. There's a really famous concert hall in St. Louis called the Pageant. And you go south of Del Mar and it's Washington University, and it's, turn of the century World's Fair mansions. And then you go north of Del Mar, like behind the Pageant, and you step into a totally segregated apartheid system.
Quick question about that. Does I'm not familiar with obviously the street names in both of the, like, I should be more familiar with Buffalo, but I'm not. But does Martin Luther King Boulevard run through both those areas? Because from my experience, that's usually where it runs.
Yeah, I would have to look at exactly where on a map. But St. Louis definitely has Martin Luther King Boulevard for sure. But I can't picture it. I haven't lived in St. Louis in about 20 years, so can't quite picture it off the top of my head. But it definitely exists. But yeah, I mean, the way that Hitchens writes about this stuff is it's just apologism, justification through and through. Very disappointing. It minimizes the extreme amount of suffering that has taken place throughout history. Of which there are countless consequences running through society to this day.
It's another thing where I'm sorry to keep going on this, but it's like if we take out all the bad and only accept the good, we're absolutely going to repeat the bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like, let's be real. Like, you look at Florida right now.
Oh man, I know.
We don't even need to talk about it. Just say Florida.
Florida. Just look at me through the camera here, and we're just like Florida, and everybody can, think about it themselves. And what makes me so sad about the ways that political systems and trends in politics develop in states is that there are absolutely amazing people in Florida. Like when I was in Pensacola last summer, I went to this there's like this really super famous punk house and amazing vegan restaurant like right around the corner from it in Pensacola. And I'm just like, wow, this is just the coolest place ever. And I was meeting cool people, and I'm just thinking about like the ways that their political trends develop. And you don't get to you people can leave and can move, but moving is so expensive and challenging and time consuming that a lot of people don't have the means or the ability to relocate from certain places that are going in directions that they don't like. A lot of people are completely stuck in Florida who are absolutely incredible and amazing people. But we've got this next one. We've got the treaties that we broke, the lands that we filched, the settlements put to the torch, the children we abused, all for your own good, of course. So this line has precise references to the Christopher Hitchens essay that the song is based on. So the full passage from that Hitchens piece that inspired this line reads, quote, "Not long ago, another good man, Ted Solitaroff, sent me a book he had helped edit called Black Hills, White Justice by Edward Lazarus. This details the long courtroom battle fought by various factions of the Sioux to reclaim their rights in the mountains of South Dakota. You can guess the story. Treaties broken, lands filched, settlements put to the torch, women and children vilely abused. And all of it done by the Sioux to the Kiowa Indians who had controlled the Black Hills before the Sioux got there in 1814. So basically what it's saying is Hitchens is like defending the history of settler colonialism by saying that this happens to and by all cultures, sorta. And that, yes, even though immigrants to the North American continent definitely did do bad things, the original inhabitants of the continent were already doing bad things. So he's like, yeah, we were bad, but there was already bad stuff. So it's the way that his logic spun out on this one that, well, if they were doing bad stuff, surely our bad stuff leading to the creation of what I see as a great society is surely okay, right? Because it was already going to happen regardless of we did it too.
He's defending two wrongs make a right.
There you go. There you go. And that's one of the earliest lessons of childhood that everybody is alleged to have internalized when they were what, 5?
Well, just because your buddy's doing it doesn't mean you have to do it. That's basically what this is.
Yeah.
And just because your buddy's spray painting around the school doesn't mean you have to go do it.
Yeah. Well, and the children abuse line in this lyric really jumps out at me. I know it's a reference to the original essay that Hitchens wrote, but the child abuse situation is important to consider given the discoveries of mass graveyards across residential schools in Canada the past couple of years. And I found some interesting, stuff and information about that. There's an article that from CBS where Anderson Cooper interviewed a former residential school student named Leona Wolf, and he summarized it pretty well. And he said, quote, "In May of 2021, when archaeologists detected what they believed to be 200 unmarked graves in an old school in Canada, it brought new attention to one of the most shameful chapters of that nation's history. Starting in the 1880s and for much of the 20th century, more than 150,000 children from hundreds of Indigenous communities across Canada were forcibly taken from their parents by the government and sent to what were called residential schools. Funded by the state and run by churches, they were designed to assimilate and Christianize Indigenous children by ripping them from their parents, their culture, and their community. The children were often referred to as savages and forbidden from speaking their languages or practicing their traditions. As Anderson Cooper first reported last year, many were physically and sexually abused, and thousands of children never made it home. So there were 139 residential schools in Canada, and the last one only closed in 1998, which I think is important to know.
This is a very important topic here in Canada that we should be talking about far more than we are. There was a period, I think it was around 2 years ago, where every week new graves were being discovered at schools, and like the tally was going up and up, and everyone was talking about it. But since then, the mainstream discussion has fallen off of this topic, and it should have never fizzled out, because it's still such an important thing that needs to be discussed. And like, I would love to say that, I'm super qualified to talk about this, but obviously I'm not. My wonderful and lovely partner, who did her thesis on intergenerational trauma with residential schools, would probably be more qualified to talk about this than I would.
Well, if you want to do a Comply Resist Part 3 with her, where you two just have a conversation and she just tells you what she knows, maybe that could be an interesting accompaniment to this particular episode. You and her having a conversation about sharing what she knows about it. That would be pretty cool, I think.
I will bring it up.
Yeah. So here is at this line is where the song shifts. Okay. We take on a new direction in the plot of the song. I see all these songs as like microscopic short stories. So here's the plot turn. It just happens to be the way history has been made. Just don't play with a toy gun or change lanes without signaling. So these are direct references. We jump way forward in history here. The toy gun is a reference, in my view, to Tamir Rice, and a child who was shot and killed by a 26-year-old cop who arrived on the scene in a park where Tamir Rice was playing with a plastic gun, and the cop jumped out of the car and basically began shooting within seconds. You can find video footage of it online if you want to see something awful, where a child is in a park and a 26-year-old, very young police officer jumps out of a car, sees what they think is a real gun, and just basically begins shooting. So how dare you be a child in a park with a piece of plastic, essentially, and be black in the United States? And the changing lanes without signaling, to me, is a reference to Sandra Bland, who was driving in Texas, did not use a turn signal, was arrested, and died in police custody in 2015. So to me, these are a couple of very recent specific cultural references that have been, driving a lot of conversation in the U.S. in the last 15 years or so.
Man, if police killed every person that didn't use turn signals, there'd be no one left.
Oh yeah, I would have been killed this morning. Yeah. I was driving on the highway this morning on my way home, and didn't use a turn signal because I had plenty of space and there was no one around. So
it is literally something every person does.
Yeah. Yeah. So imagine, and the body cam, or the camera footage, Sandra Bland filmed the entire encounter, and that footage did make it out. And in there, you can be like, "You're pulling me over for not signaling? Are you serious?" Like, you can just hear the disappointment and the disdain for something so banal being the cause for having her day ruined.
It's insane.
Yeah. So then we get into this next thing where the title of the song comes in. So don't comply, don't resist, because it don't make no difference. Comply, resist, no difference. Resist, comply, you die. Anthony Siracusa and I talked a lot about this particular thing. in our interview, Chris goes into great depth about what he sees as the meaning of the title of the song in his Patreon. And I'm sure that anybody out there can find numerous examples of this type of conundrum where you resist and you get killed, or you don't resist and then something happens and then you die anyway. The no example speaks more highly to me of that conundrum than the story of a man named Kenneth Chamberlain, which is a story that has stuck with me for many years now. And just to kind of tell you a little bit about Kenneth Chamberlain, have you ever heard this story before?
I have not.
So in November of 2011, at 5 a.m, a man named Kenneth Chamberlain was at home at a public housing building in New York City. He had a medical alert necklace that he was sleeping. He rolled over, activated his medical necklace, right? It sent an alert to the customer service people at his medical pendant company, who called an ambulance and the police to do a wellness check at his apartment. Okay. So this is an old man, also a former Marine, former U.S. Marine, Kenneth Chamberlain. So firefighters, cops, and ambulance crews show up. The cops knock on the door. Chamberlain did not open the door. He told them through the door that he rolled over on the pendant in his sleep. He was not having an emergency. He did not require assistance, and he asked them to leave so he'd go back to sleep. The police do not leave. They insist that he opens the door, and the pendant was recording this entire conversation, right? That there's an audio recording of this. The police become belligerent. They bang on the door. Chamberlain was calling the operator from his medical pendant company to call for help, that he was like going to be attacked in his home and killed by the police for rolling over on his pendant in his sleep and not opening the door, because he knew that the cops were going to do something horrible to him if he opened the door. So they broke open the door. An hour later, they banged on the door for an hour. So we're talking about 5 to 6 o'clock in the morning. They went in the apartment, and the cops say he came at them with a butcher knife. But the family totally, discards that thing. The police tased him. They shot him with a beanbag round fired from a shotgun. And they then shot him twice in the chest with live ammunition. And he died in surgery later. So whenever I think of like the title Comply, Resist, whenever I think about the lyric here, comply, resist, no difference, resist, comply, you die, I personally think about the life story and the death of former Marine Kenneth Chamberlain, who was killed just simply by rolling over on a medical alert necklace and not wanting the cops to come into his apartment at 5 o'clock in the morning.
That's an awful story.
Yeah, and you'll never forget that story now, will you?
No, that is horrific.
Yeah, so to me, that's like the biggest example of comply, resist, you die, no difference. That's the definitive example for me, and I cannot even imagine how many more examples there actually are in the world.
Oh, I'm sure there's, with the amount of shootings and killings that happen, there's probably one a week at this point, like easily.
Yeah. Well, and on his Patreon, on this part of his own analysis, Chris was talking about the effectiveness of police and how they're funded using, our money, essentially, that we pay our towns in the form of like property taxes and stuff. And Chris has this section of his episode where he encourages listeners to pause and check out the clearance rates for police departments in their own city. So what are we paying for, right? And I found those for Buffalo. I found an article from the Investigative Post, which uses the FBI's Uniform Crime Report on mid-sized cities between 200 and 500,000 people. And the analysis found that Buffalo cops solve 48% of violent crime. The clearance rate, that is cases resulting in an arrest, among the 79 peer cities is 49%. So Buffalo is about average for their clearance rate for cities of comparable size. Buffalo's clearance rate for murders in mid-sized cities is 26%, which is the fourth worst clearance rate for mid-sized cities in the U.S. The property crime in Buffalo, which is burglary, larceny, and auto theft, declined 46% from 2006 to 2019. But the city's property crime rate was the 36th worst. And with the massive surge in car thefts lately with regards to a problem with Kia and Hyundai cars, the car theft problem in Buffalo is currently skyrocketing. And if you go on Buffalo Reddit, you can read people who are posting comments like every single day, like, hey, my car got stolen. I got this Kia or I got this Hyundai, and they're getting stolen left and right. And people are posting pictures of their cars on Buffalo Reddit saying, hey, if anybody sees my car, it got stolen. So there's a massive problem with that. But those are some of the clearance rates for Buffalo right now.
You're making me terrified to drive my Kia to Buffalo.
Oh, you have a Kia?
I do.
Ooh. What does your partner drive?
We have one Kia. Just the one car. I'm going to have to invest in the club. No one's steal anything with a club on the wheel, right?
It's barely a deterrent. So here's what we may have to do. When you come to Buffalo, when you're doing anything with me, we will park your car in my garage and we will take my car. So if we're like going to shows and stuff in Buffalo, we can just figure it out to where we park your car in my house and we'll drive to the show in my car.
There's it kind of reminds me of a situation where it's a Seinfeld episode, but it happened to me in real life. Years ago when I went to see Springsteen on Broadway in New York, I had parked my car at like a parking garage, but I didn't realize that I'd visited my buddy in Connecticut a few days before, and I'd grabbed some like shells and stuff from like the beach, and I had them in the car. And after the car sitting for 2 days at the parking garage, I got it back. The car smelled so bad. It smelled like there was rotting fish all in the car. I could not figure out why. And I'm like, I could just leave this car unlocked. No one is taking this. No one is getting in this car. But it was because like the shells they weren't cleaned or whatever, and they were baking in the back of the car in the parking garage. I'm like, if my car just smells terrible, no one is ever going to take it. Yeah. Well, you can funkify your own car and see if that's a deterrent here in Buffalo. So yeah, this is a really powerful lyric whenever you think about an example that any listeners out there have heard of: comply, die, resist, die. And how it doesn't really matter what you do when there is a massive system. We did an episode a ways back about pigs will pay. And I think that I did a big breakdown about the concept of something called killology, which is a training that police officers in the US have gone through for many years, about like when you should be willing to discharge your firearm in a lethal manner. So it's just the way that a lot of the trainings have gone for a long time now. Hilarious. I thought it was a video game when you said killology. I was like, that's got to be a video game. Yeah, there's a great podcast called Behind the Bastards, and they did an amazing episode about killology in that episode, and about what it is, the person who made the training, what the trainings are like, what it does to police officers' minds. So definitely go find Behind the Bastards and listen to that Killology podcast. That sounds great. I will absolutely go listen to that. Really good. So then moving on, we've got this next lyric: the funny names you give your kids, the silly ways you do your hair, the jungle music that you blare, we snicker and we sneer, for they do not revere the incessant gadgetry we incessantly deploy to incessantly extract and incessantly destroy. You know, the incessantly extract line is an overlooked one.
back when I was a high school teacher in a school that had one-to-one iPads for all students, I made my students do this article reading one time where it talked about the ways that metals that go into creating smartphone devices are mined around the world, and the conditions in which those things that are necessary for the metals that are in our phones and iPads and stuff like that, the way those things are found. And I'm like, yeah, so you're just carrying around basically this device that's just essentially the definition of human rights violations. And they were like, oh. So it was just the incessantly extract line to me is a really important one here.
Also, using the word incessantly 4 times.
Yes, seriously.
In that short of time.
Really interesting choice, right?
Yeah.
Do you think he overdid it?
No, I don't. I think he's just driving home the point. Right? Like sometimes you have to really put it out there kind of in over the top way for the point to be driven home.
Yeah. I like that you pointed that out. I'm glad you counted. Yeah, so we've got a lot going on in this line. The funny names thing is super important. There's a common thing that used to happen to me as a teacher that used to drive me crazy was when in the beginning of the year we would get all of our rosters, and we'd be in meetings nonstop, and I would have vivid memories of sitting next to teachers looking at their rosters and sighing with exasperation, like when they were trying to read names of students that they had never even met. So all this person is a name on a screen or on their roster. They haven't even met the kid yet, and they're sitting there trying to read the names out and like having like a crisis, like of like being like, I don't know how to say this name. And you can just watch them come to these like negative judgments and conclusions in real time for students that they've never even met yet, that are going to be in their classroom for a full year, and they're already coming to judge these students in a negative way before meeting them, just based on how easy or how easy their name is to say when reading it off of a screen. That happened to me like a whole bunch of times as a teacher. And, just coming to hold an opinion on someone they don't even know based on the name. It's just really a sad realization that I had when I was like looking at this line again.
It's an interesting concept because, when I'd read that you kind of had some notes on that, I was thinking back to how things were when I was going through school, and, the kids with the harder to pronounce names, and how even how teachers used to like make fun of the pronunciation of the names, or not really respecting like different cultural names and things like that. It was very much like a big part of schooling growing up.
Absolutely. One memory that really stands out to me is there was one student in his former school that I taught in, and the student had 2 apostrophes in their name. And so one teacher was just like going on and on and on in the meeting about how many apostrophes do you need in your name. And it just sticks with me whenever I think about this. And a lot of listeners of this podcast will likely have people very close to them in their own lives who they've personally heard making fun of naming conventions from cultures that they're not even a part of. So I don't know. It's something that a lot of people have a ton of experience with. And I love the way that Chris wrote it because it's meant to sound derogatory, but mocking of the people who do that, right? Those names are so funny. So it's meant to be mocking and derogatory of the people who make fun of people's names without even really knowing or appreciating or trying to understand that person or their life at all.
I would love to have the perspective of someone who kind of grew up with a name that would have triggered those reactions, because like obviously my name is pretty standard and no one's really saying anything about that, and yours is as well. So
Yeah.
but just to hear someone's perspective on it after they've gone through school and reflecting on it like all these years later, that'd be very interesting.
Yeah, and Chris in his Patreon is really thoughtful in his comments about the contributions of he's like, what is white culture? What has white culture contributed to society? And it was like he came up with all this like classical music, NASCAR, country, and so it's like the line of we snicker and we sneer, is it's like we're pissed at other populations of people for not thinking that we're amazing, when really our main cultural contributions within the world is like country, NASCAR, and classical music. And Chris's list was so funny, especially since I come from Missouri, a place where country music and NASCAR is insanely popular.
Well, even if we could just quickly touch on NASCAR for a second, yeah, like, and within the last, I want to say since 2020, one of the biggest stories in NASCAR is that, wow, we have an actual super talented black driver driving for a team owned by a black owner.
Amazing.
And do you remember when they finally, like in 2020, decided to ban the Confederate flag from NASCAR?
Yeah.
I'm like, NASCAR is the most white you can get.
Mm-hmm.
And like it took them all those years to be like, you know what, Confederate flag, and then like, Bubba is finding like noose poles in his garage and stuff. And like if you read any actual, not that I'm advising reading comments. So I used to be very into NASCAR, like in motors. I'm just into motorsports.
Yeah.
Anyways, if you read any of like NASCAR social media posts that's about Bubba Wallace, it's just hundreds of comments of basically people, displaying how racist they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and the gadgetry line is really interesting, because essentially we're all amusing ourselves to death, to paraphrase Neil Postman. But what our society now is everybody staring at their phones, on TikTok, on Snapchat, on Instagram, on Twitter, filling up our days with an endless stream of gadgetry distraction. And I looked up the cultural demographic breakdown of Apple, because I was like, I wonder what the corporate demographics are for a place like Apple that is like creating this new society where no one is capable of doing anything but like sit on their phones all day. And Apple currently is 55% white, 62% male, and Apple's global workforce was 70% male in 2014, and now it's 62%. The racial breakdown of Apple was 55% white in 2014 and remains 55% white today. I know that Steve Jobs was half Syrian, but it feels as if the gadgetry line is about the technologies that is like a major contributor to the world by, like the white culture of North America. I'm not 100% sure here, but I really enjoyed the gadgetry line, and I enjoyed digging into some of the corporate demographics for Apple itself.
Oh, when you look at just even tech companies and the demographics of most tech companies, they don't skew much more different than that.
Yeah. Then the other lyric, or the other line in here, is the jungle music that you blare lyric. To me, that's a clear reference to Jordan Davis, the Florida 17-year-old that was killed in 2012 by a guy who was basically enraged that teenagers would listen to music he doesn't find enjoyable at loud volumes in gas station parking lots. Even the murderer's own girlfriend testified in court that he said that he hates thug music and he dislikes rap crap before getting into an argument with Jordan Davis and firing shots through the side of the car. Davis's friends then drove away from the shooting, and they found Davis like wheezing to death, and he later died of his injuries. And the guy that shot him in the parking lot basically went about his night. He was like going to his like son's wedding or something, and he winds up shooting at a teenager's car in a parking lot because they had their music loud. And he was like, turn that down. So then they turned it down, but then they turned it back up because they're teenagers, and they were just like messing with this like old square who was just like boring as hell and like yelling at them in a gas station parking lot. And they died. So the jungle music line to me is a clear reference to the shooting of Jordan Davis in 2012.
Yeah, that's horrific. I mean, you got like, I understand how, it's the same thing of like when you're riding on public transit, and like maybe this is a new thing. I haven't ridden public transit in a while since I haven't been living in Toronto, but like the amount of people that listen to their phones on like full volume, like listening to music or whatever, and I'm like, it's really not hard to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
And like for people to take that large of a stance with regards to music, the harmless activity that someone else is committing is awful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and then we've got the "you don't worship us. Oh, why don't you worship us? Resist, comply, you die." The price for not just total adoration and fawning over us is death. And like our country music, like our NASCAR, use our naming conventions. Name your kids Greg and Steve. Structure your families like ours, even though I'm divorced. So now I have a broken home or whatever. Continue to rely on us for our endless humoring and pacifying through our, LED backlit doom boxes that we all carry around. Use our gadgets to amuse yourselves into complacency so you don't protest the things that you care about that are based on the history of subjugation. Sit down, shut up, stop protesting, use our gadgets, worship us, go to NASCAR, or maybe you'll die.
I mean, that's so sad.
Yeah. Well, this is a hard song. Like I said at the very beginning, I procrastinated the living heck out of this one because talking about it is daunting, and this is what this band does. They're just masters of getting you to rack your brain and think about it and connect it to stories in society. Every song is just a massive black hole of information.
But it's important that they're doing that, because it's giving so many people, like we'll discuss on this more when we do the How to Clean anniversary episode.
Mm-hmm.
But it's giving so many people who may not have been exposed to these ideas an outlet to be exposed to these topics and ideas in a very, a digestible way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went on YouTube too, and I found some comments. So one comment I liked was, "I've listened to this album likely over 100 times, but I keep coming back to this song. Every time I come back, gives me goosebumps and brings me to literal tears, along with Lower Order. Propaganda is the most underrated band in rock history, and every album gets better." Love that. Another is the best song I have heard in at least a decade. Another one says, "I found Propaganda by seeing a roller coaster in the water." So that's cool. Another one said, "The riffs on this one coming from Chris's axe is harder than Creator," which I thought was really cool. And then another one said, "My favorite from the album, wish Christopher was still alive to be able to respond to the message carried by the lyrics. It would surely make for an interesting debate. I guess we'll never know," referring to Christopher Hitchens.
I mean, I love the Creator comment.
Yeah.
Especially because the riffs on this song are so hard.
Mm-hmm. They're amazing. Do you have any, kind of takeaway concluding thoughts here for our very long conversation about Comply Resist?
Like I said, I think this song is in the upper tier of propaganda songs.
I think they would agree.
And that's why I would love if this, if I'm putting together the ultimate propaganda album, I'm putting this towards, I mean, obviously, Fear in a Hall of Fame is the ultimate closing song, but I think this song could have closed this album for sure.
Nice. Yeah, I like the clearly and sobering assessing of history and how this continent came to be inhabited by the people who inhabit it. That story matters to me. I'm glad that I've spent time in my life learning some of those stories, even though there's so much more to learn. Times change, and what we admire and revere from here on out is allowed to change, in my view. I think that we should be able to remove the adoration of people in the past who we've revealed historically and accurately to be not amazing. I think the times should be allowed to change. And so I like that this song refers to Columbus Day trends in the US. I like it that it holds a public thinker, Christopher Hitchens, accountable for something that a lot of fans of Christopher Hitchens don't even know that he wrote. And this is an absolutely wonderful song. And it's it's one of them 5 out of 5 propaganda tunes.
Is that your official rating?
I'm ranking it at 5 out of 5. I was going to rank it lower. I was going to give it a 4.75 out of 5 because I thought that the intro was a little long. And a couple times in the past, I have skipped this song to go right to Cop Just Out of Frame because I want to get to the rock. But you have convinced me of the perfection of the long intro. So yes, I was going to do 4.75, but instead I'm going 5.
That's hilarious because I love this song and I'm rating it a 4.5.
Wow. Okay. I'm still going 5. I'm sticking with it. Why did you go 4.5?
Well, because Pure in a Hall of Fame is my favorite propaganda song. And if I'm Pure in a Hall of Fame is my 5.5 out of 5.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I look at I guess I'm extremely harsh about critiques and stuff, in that I find it very not difficult, but also maybe improbable for a band to have, 10 5 out of 5 songs. Like, to me, a 5 out of 5 song is like a once in a generational song that a band can put out. Like, I don't know if bands that are not named Bruce Springsteen can have a lot of songs that are not 5 out of 5.
All right. Well, here's the thing. I'm going back to 4.75 out of 5 then.
That's fair.
I'm going back. I'm removing the 5 and I'm going 4.75. I will gladly receive the ire and rage of listeners who will be very frustrated by my jumping around on this.
Well, because you just have to look at it, like if you take your favorite song and if that's a 5, where does this rank in relation to your favorite song? You have to have a scale somewhere, right? True.
My favorite propaganda song is Supporting Cast. And that's a fairly recent revelation of mine. But I've decided that's my favorite song. So this one, it's a
0.25. You like it 0.25 less?
Less. Yep. 0.25 less than Supporting Cast.
I think that's fair.
Perfect.
So that's why I'm coming at 4.5. Like, love the song. I don't think that's a shot at the song. I think it's an unbelievable song.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, Steve, this has been an absolute joy. We have, I feel like we've done this song justice. Great conversations with our guests, Aukai, Anthony, and Jeremy. A great couple of covers from Aukai and Anthony as well. Love this tune. I'm definitely open to doing a part 3 if people out there, if anybody ever sends me any tips on a reason to revisit this tune, I would do it. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at propagandipod. Email us at propagandipod@gmail.com. Steve, it's been a real pleasure today hanging out and chatting Comply Resist.
It's been fun. I'm glad that we finally did this one.
Circa 1992, Hitchens faxes copy through as regards Columbus Day. If you'll permit me the conceit of a posthumous critique, I'll paraphrase. My colorful exotic friend, respectable, well-spoken, unlike the rest of them. As you know, I'm colorblind, and you're a credit to your kind. Your kind. The silly talk of resurgence, ceremony communion with an unconquered natural world. Tell me, where is your gratitude for all we've done for you? This paradise Eden Empire Kingdom. This policy back we bestow. 27 gems to live when I cause mistakes to make. But as far as human progress goes, when to slay, I am running. Invasion, opportunity, free and trample, community. The treaties that we wrote, the lands that were built, settlements put to the judge. The children we abuse are for no good of cause. I've been still, been the word, history has been made. Just don't play with the drunken, change with a single name. Don't comply, don't resist, and don't make no difference. Comply, resist. No difference. Resist, comply. You die. The funny names you give the kids, the silly ways you do your hair, the type of music that you play. We snicker and we sneer, but they do not fear. This is a jackson tree. When it says to leave it blood, do it says to leave it shot, and it says to leave it strike. You don't worship us, oh why? Don't you worship us, oh? Racist comply, you die.
A cover of this song, and I'm like, man, hell yeah, do it. Because the covers have become seriously some of my favorite things about this show. There must be 50 of them in the show by now. It's insane. And so tell me why you decided to embark upon this extremely challenging idea. So people have already heard the cover way back in the beginning of the episode. Tell me why you decided to pursue this instead of just like being a guest on the episode itself.
Well, it was really a selfish reason. I had this idea for a band I wanted to do for many years, and it was just, I couldn't actually visualize it. Like I said, I'm not like a really trained musician in any way. So I knew what I wanted to do was take Polynesian sounds and put them in a punk context. And this song is so perfect for the themes that I would talk about in a band of my own. These themes of colonization and things like that are really important to me. It just seemed like a great opportunity to try it out and see if I can make it sound how I wanted it to sound. It's still not exactly like what I would write, obviously, because Propaganda are geniuses, and also I have just different influences and stuff. But it's really close to what I was trying to pull off, and it was just a good exercise. I've been so ignorant in my life throughout the years, but there was a artist who's a rapper named Poetic, who won Pacific Artist of the Year a few years back. And I was listening to one of his songs on YouTube, and I commented like, kind of sucks that you're trying to sound like a South California rapper from the 90s. Like, we have our own sounds, we have our own voices. Like, why not do that? I just wrote a stupid, snarky internet comment, and I deleted it. I felt bad about it instantly. I'm like, why am I doing this to another artist? But the way YouTube works is it leaves those comments up in his inbox, even though I've deleted it. So he still saw it. And then he doxed me. And it was actually a really educational experience for me, because all of his fans came and told me what they thought about my dumb comment. And it was really eye-opening. You know, it was, not only did I not know that Pacific Islanders were in the spaces where hip hop and rap were being created in Southern California for the very first time. Not only did I not know that reggae was happening in the Pacific at the exact same time it was happening in Jamaica, for instance. I thought of those as black sounds, which is not a problem, other than I grew up around white kids who were misappropriating those black sounds all the time. So when I, growing up in the era I grew up, when I think of Bob Marley or I think of hip hop, I think of white kids in dorm rooms. I don't think of black culture. Do you know what I mean? And so I just thought, I don't want to see my own people do that. I don't want to see us appropriate black music. Let's do our own thing. Let's use our own sounds. We've got this great musical history. Why can't we do our own thing? And as Poetic very cleverly said to me, like, the obvious response is, why don't you do your own thing? I was like, good idea. I'll do my own thing. And, it took just a little bit deeper thinking to realize, well, okay, also I'm appropriating white music, and also that white music also is black music. And it's just funny. Like, it was a stupid argument to begin with. But what I did learn was the inventor of the steel, lap steel slide guitar, it was a Hawaiian man. The inventor of the guitar amplifier were some Hawaiian kids in the car shop class. The ukulele is I believe it's a Portuguese instrument, but those, that was important in Pacific culture, still is. The slack key guitar also, I think, came from Mexico or Portugal, but is important Hawaiian instrument. And so I just wanted to, but then the drums are really Polynesian, Tongan and Tahitian drums. And I just want to take all of these elements that were kind of part of Pacific culture and apply those to the kind of music I like. Really for protest music, because I should have said this earlier, like, protest music in the islands is all reggae or hip hop. And so I just thought we need protest songs that are just a different genre, just so it exists. Like, I don't need to be famous or tour or anything. I just want it to exist in the world, that there is Pacific protest music in another style, because I wasn't into those styles. So that's kind of where this came from. And it was sludge in my brain as I would try to describe it to friends who I wanted to start these bands with. They'd be like, I don't know if that's going to work. And so I needed to actualize it. And so that's what this was, an opportunity for me to try it out, basically.
Amazing. Well, I love the cover. Love it. I've listened to it 20 times easily since you sent it to me. And I want to hear the story of how this thing came together. I have so many questions about the creation of this recording. I want to know studio details. I want to know who was involved. I want to know what instruments appear on the song. I want to know what was the hardest thing. What was the funnest thing? I have so many questions about the story. Just tell me the story of recording this song.
Well, again, the idea was, can we do this kind of song with Pacific instruments? And then, and the first thing I realized was surf rock is the way to get into this, because surf rock is another genre that's already utilizing the Hawaiian steel guitar, and it's also utilizing Pacific Islander drums. I was like, okay, that's how we get into this. That's the way to, and it's fast music. Anyone who's heard the Pulp Fiction soundtrack is kind of familiar with the sound of it a little bit.
Dick Dale,
exactly. And the Ventures, all this stuff, the Lively Ones. Can we use that energy for this protest music? Was really just the basic idea. And so this would absolutely not have been possible without Joel Pack at Rigby Road Studios. Joel is a musical genius. I met him when he was 13 years old. He was the original bassist for a group called Strange Itch, which later turned into The Used in my local scene.
Wow, cool.
So Joel met Jeff, who's the current bass player for the Used, at the mall, and Jeff had dreads, and he said, "Hey man, can you sing? You look cool." And so he recruited Jeff as the singer of that band. And then Joel eventually quit that band, and Jeff became the bass player of the Used. But Joel was in that early incarnation of that group, and he also had a major record label deal with Maverick Records, and was totally screwed when that record label closed just as his album was coming out. Warner Brothers said, "We're going to keep Alanis Morissette and the Deftones, and everybody else we're dropping." And his album was like a few days, I think, from coming out when that happened. So,
oh my God.
What he's done is he's taken his musical time. He still does that band, Broke City, and they're great. He also does some solo work that's great. But he's taken a lot of that energy and he put it into Rigby Road Studios, and where he records and produces a lot of amazing bands. And he was just my friend who I knew who was a musical genius. And I just said, if anybody can help me figure out the sludge in my brain, it's Joel. And he basically single-handedly helped me one by one, like work through each of these instruments, work through each of these parts. He came up with some really cool ideas. Like there's a moment where Chris is like, and he turned that into and he heard that Dick Dale guitar slide in that kind of thrashy stuff Chris was doing, and connected those two ideas, which to me makes the song. Like I was like, that was brilliant, you know. There's another breakdown in the song where it's like, the silly names you give your kids. In my mind, that was going to be the Wipeout. If you've ever heard the song Wipeout,
Yeah,
just how it's like just like that ongoing drum thing. I'm like, I just want that to just only be drums, like pull out all the guitar. And it was Joel's idea to be like, why don't we use like actual jungle sounds here? Like you're talking about the jungle music that you play. Why don't you put in some Polynesian vocals into this part? And so we ended up using a ha'a, which is the Hawaiian version of the haka, which people would probably be more familiar with from New Zealand.
yeah.
So he had some really great ideas that made the thing, and his instrumentation, his genius as a musician helped nail a bunch of these parts that I could not have figured out on my own, just simply because of I just couldn't. It's kind of like I just had all these ideas in my head that I couldn't figure out what they would sound like, and he helped me get those all down. And yeah, so we just went through the song piece by piece. I'm like, this should be this instrument, this should be that instrument. And it's all the ones I mentioned. You know, it's a Hawaiian steel guitar, which is cool because Joel also grew up in Utah, and his grandmother was a colonial settler in Hawaii. She was a mathematics teacher at Brigham Young University, and she bought this Hawaiian steel guitar there in 1979 that he now owns. And so I think he saw this as his payback, like his penance for his grandmother's actions was to like perform that Hawaiian steel guitar on this song. So I thought that was beautiful, a nice gesture of his. And so that appears on the song. There's ukulele, there's Tahitian and Tongan drums. There are guitar sounds like a Telecaster that's, you know, very much in the Dick Dale style. And then something wasn't quite working because the propaganda song is so dark. It just wasn't quite fitting the tone I was going for. So we ended up changing the tuning, like it's in drop C. We changed it so that the timing was a difficult thing. Was getting the tempo, changing it to a single tempo was really difficult, but that's one of the things we did to make it work better for the style. And then another of Joel's idea was, let's throw in that surf rock drum kit in a couple spots. I didn't want to do that because I wanted to really stick with the Polynesian drums. But he's like, this will sell the surf rock sound you're going for. Because that's what I wanted it to sound like, almost like at first people think like, oh, is this a surf rock song I've never heard? Like that's kind of what I was going for in my mind. And it was getting into that same tempo and then throwing in that 60s drum kit, like he called it the that thing you do drum kit, into a couple parts. I think it really worked. And one of the things he said was the Venn diagram of where George drums and Polynesian drums meet is very tiny. There's not a lot of similarities there, but what is there is triplets. And so that's really where we chased those moments and tried to feel like it was like that propaganda stuff was using a lot of those triplets in the same place as Jordan was using triplets. So that was the big thing. And then then around that utilizing those big traditional Polynesian drum sounds. What else? I think the vocals are a little bit more wet than I would prefer. And I know Chris also doesn't love like overly produced vocals. And I was a little bit annoyed at first because I was like, oh, my vocals are pretty raw and this sounds like a little juicy. And he's like, yeah, but it's got to sound kind of dreamy and hypnotic because that's the vibe of the surf guitar. And the vocals can't, like, they have to kind of like be a little bit dreamy too. So we went with a little bit more wet vocals than I normally would prefer. But it was, again, this was experimentation because this is basically what I'm doing is I'm starting a Polynesian protest band. And I wanted, this was the proof of concept for that for me. So
incredible. Did you use Chris's Patreon playthrough video for this guitar riff? Because that guitar riff that he does where he's like doing a little marching sound with his pointer finger and middle finger is like that main riff. Like watching him do the playthrough video, I'm like, this is insane the way he plays this. And I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on like the guitar performance and how you went through that.
No, that again was Joel, and he just is a genius and he just nailed it. I had
unbelievable.
No issue with it, which is crazy because we all know Chris is a genius. So, Joel's just insane. He's super skilled, and with the bass, it pretty much follows the bass, but it has more of like a 808 bass, like subtle dance hall tone. It's a little bit different, but we pretty much followed that. There are some parts where the Telecaster guitar is playing the bass line, I think, but and then I mean, I don't know. It's all different and it's all the same. We really tried to hone as close to it as possible. But if there was ever a conflict, it was like go towards surf rock. Like that was the idea. If they're
amazing.
Anytime it didn't work, it was like let's go in the surf rock direction. So.
That is really, really awesome. How many sessions in the studio are we looking at here? Because this is amazingly well done.
Oh, thanks. It wasn't as much as it sounds like. Like it was like 2 or 3 times. It was maybe like 2 times actually recording. Plus, I did vocals separately in a hotel room and then on GarageBand and then sent them into the studio. But a lot of the time was just figuring it out. So there's probably an additional 2 or 3 days in the studio just trying to like, how do we do this? You know what I mean? And I was very lucky to have Joel as a friend and have his own studio space where we could play around and he could really try stuff out and run it by me, and we could nail that concept.
What an incredibly joyful experience to be able to do this with your friend too. You know what I mean?
It was great. It was really fun. Yeah, absolutely.
That is incredible. I do want to chat about the lyrics for a while, if that's okay.
I would love to.
I am just like so much of the what is this song about has already been
made. Just don't play with the toy gun. Shake their twins on single leg. Don't comply, don't resist, cause it don't make a difference. Comply, resist. No difference. Resist, comply. Funny names you give your kids, the silly ways you do your hair, the jungle music that you blare. We snicker and we sneer, for they do not revere. This says the gadget tree, when it says the lay deploy, true it says the lay extract, and it says the lay destroy. You don't worship us away. Don't you worship us, oh